Video not on? It's Lisa.
Hi there, how are you?
Good.
Just letting a few more people in. Hi everyone.
Hey, Daz, can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you hear you fine?
Okay.
How's everyone coping with the virus lockdown and everything?
Just not leaving the house. I send my wife out and let her do all the.
That's the safest way, yeah.
I actually think Jim and I had it, that we are those people that don't get really bad symptoms, because I found out I was exposed to a couple of different people 6 days before they came down with it. And I've had like these really crazy bad arthritic conditions, but you know, that's sort of average for me. But it was real bad. And I remember my husband like a month ago said he thought he had the flu right before it hit Connecticut, or they said it did. And now I realize we were probably asymptomatic, but we're still locked down. Why not?
Yeah, yeah. It's best to be safe, isn't it?
Yep.
I saw a webinar with Lynn last week, and he talked about hitting a target, this, you know, the future targeting about this COVID thing. And he was seeing like an agrarian society, and I'm seeing Lori Williams building this like geodome thing in her house, and of course Dick Algire's, you know, doing his own thing out there. You guys are scaring the crap out of me, so you know.
Well, there are a lot of people getting some very interesting, weird data right now. So, yeah, it's an interesting time. Not just virus stuff, but yeah, lots of interesting stuff. I've been comparing details on some of this with Russell Pickering. We've been collecting data from people like Farsight Institute, the Crypto Viewing people, and a few other people on Facebook. A lot of people getting very similar data for all kinds of possible strange stuff that might be coming up, military action and something to do with satellites and objects in space, and yeah, very strange stuff.
Are you finding you have a lot of noise when you're remote viewing during this time?
A little bit, because you're expecting everything you do. Oh, sorry, I'm changing my seating position here. You're expecting everything you do to have a virus kind of connection to it, because you know it's so big in everyone's lives at the moment. So you kind of have to try to put that to one side. Yeah, so it is a little bit harder. Plus, you know, seeing all this other stuff that everyone's coming up with as well is a bit of noise, which is a bit annoying.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's a lot of emotion on the planet right now around this coronavirus, which really, you know, kind of affects the way I'm remote viewing, because it's bringing that emotion in whether I want it to or not.
Yeah. There's a lot going on at the moment, and you know, I guess, other than the 911 events, this is the second biggest thing, or maybe even the biggest thing now in our lifetime. So it's going to have a effect on everyone, really. Just let more people in. There's 23 in at the moment. Not everyone's going to show up here though, because if they haven't got their cameras turned on, then it doesn't show them up in the big squares. Just for some of the people here, if you want to ask questions, there's a chat window. You can ask questions there as well if you don't want to speak. What else we got here? We got the reactions window as well at the bottom. Well, it's at the bottom of my screen, so you know, if you want to give a reaction to someone, you can just like clap or give them a thumbs up and so on. But it's just for the new people here, it's just like a free-for-all, really. We're just shoot breeze and ask questions and have a chat about things. There's no agenda to what we're discussing, other than it generally remote viewing related. It's just to have fun, really, and say hello to people that we don't usually say hello to.
Hey, Daz, I have a question. I was about to type it up, but I thought it might be easier to try to explain it because I'm not quite sure what it's called. But I've seen some remote viewing done by Courtney's team and other teams where they use what looks like to be a circle with 3 lines going in different directions. Not sure if it has to do with neurolinguistic programming, but I was wondering if you knew or had any thoughts about that strategy in remote viewing.
I can't remember exactly what they're doing with that. I think it's part of Courtney's advanced SRV training. I think that might be available online for free if anyone wants to have a look at it. I'm not sure. I know his earlier courses are online for free. I did try it once or twice, but this was going back probably about 8 years ago, so I can't exactly remember how and what they're doing with that. I think Dick from HRVG uses a similar kind of methodology, but yeah, I don't really know what it's worth. I kind of stick to what I know and yeah, what I've adapted through my own thing. I did try the SRV stuff with Courtney. I found it a bit too complicated at the time, so I didn't continue with it, but it was an interesting way of looking at things.
Yeah, I studied CRV, and I know that there's several different types of remote viewing out there. And for me, I always fall back to the CRV because that's the way I was trained.
Yeah.
My question that I see coming up though sometimes is that a lot of the trainers are saying don't close your eyes when you're remote viewing, and I was trained to close my eyes. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good question. Most of the time, I don't close my eyes, but I find that when I do the work on the whiteboard, which is a whole new, different experience, really, and it's a bit like if you in CRV stage 6, it's all about modeling the target. I think the whiteboard, the way you all use the whiteboard now, is very similar to the modeling. So it's very kinesthetic. You're stood up. You're moving your hands, moving your feet, moving your whole body. So it's a bit like the advanced stage 6 of CRV. And I do close my eyes quite a bit then when I'm doing it at the whiteboard. But I think that's the only time I really close my eyes personally. I'm a bit like an old-fashioned CRV junkie kind of thing, where they tell you you're not really meant to close your eyes because that causes imagination to kick in. So yeah, I try not to, other than you'll see if you see me on any of the videos doing it on the whiteboard, then I have noticed that I do close my eyes on those ones. But I think that's because I've probably done 2 to 4 paper sessions by then, and I'm halfway through the video session. So I've done the main bulk of the work, and I'm just expanding like you do, yeah, using stage 6 when you model the target. So I think it's allowable at that stage, yeah. But you know, there are other people. I think there's a discussion thread on the Facebook group at the moment about someone said they close their eyes when they're doing ideograms. Is that the right or wrong way to do it? Personally, I think it's the wrong way to do it. But if he's getting correct responses and it works for him, then just go with the flow of what works with you, really.
I don't think that would work for me to close my eyes during the ideogram. But sometimes if I feel like I'm getting stuck or something like that, I'll go ahead and close my eyes. And I seem to get more colors and flashes and things like that. But I'm really having a hard time. I was in a 4-wheeler accident and I hit my head pretty hard. So I've been having a hard time actually getting to the target. I mean, I'm still getting my impressions. I'm still, you know, stage 3, I'm still doing fine. When I get into stage 4, I don't feel like I'm actually present at the target like I used to be. And I guess that would just refer to going back and just working harder and getting more practice in.
Yeah, it could be that. I mean, and things change as well. Yeah, I'm going through a little bit of hardship the last 8-9 months. 9 months ago, I came down with an illness, which has now left me chronically in pain, pretty much.
See, that's what I have. Yeah.
Every day. Yeah. So I'm finding that I'm having to adapt and change because sometimes when you're sat there in constant pain, it's very hard to concentrate and do your CRV session.
All right, I know.
It's not the thing that's on your mind. You're just sat there thinking, oh God, I don't want to do this. Like you know. So I'm finding myself that I'm having to find new ways to adapt around this new situation I find myself in, and maybe it'd be the same for you. Maybe, you know, it's just one of these things. It takes time to work through and rechange your body, I guess, to kind of ignore, yeah, some of these things that happen to us in life. In life.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good advice. Thank you.
Just let some more people in here at the moment. We got 28 in at the moment.
Hello, can I introduce myself? I'm Juana. I'm from Romania.
Hi there.
I failed last time to do this, and hello everybody. Hello, and very, very many thanks for that. Okay.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thanks for
Nice to see you. Okay.
saying hello. I got a first question of someone. This is from David's iPhone. You're an edit. This is probably about the video I posted online today. I posted a video and it's about that. So you're unedited Roswell crash session. The tasking portion about the source of the craft. Did you feel the base may have been on Earth? So this was a remote viewing session I posted today on Facebook, and it's on YouTube. It's live remote viewing that I did on camera for Courtney in 2016. So it's the unedited files. I did the files for Courtney as a 2-part project. And he made a video from it in 2016. But when he makes his videos, he doesn't use all the entire footage. So I give, and the footage is mine. I own the footage. So I gave him 4 years to make as much money as he can off all these projects, and I'm now reusing the footage. So I posted the raw footage online and the raw paper RV sessions as well. So that's what this is in reference to. And it was a 2-part project. It was called Mysteries 15. So that's the only information I had was Target 15. But there was an A component and there was a B component. The A component was the actual Roswell event itself, to see, you know, what happened in the event in the desert. And the B component was, if there was an object, to track it back to its origin way before the crash event, to see where it came from, that kind of stuff. So yeah, they're asking, and on the B event, I did do all these sketches. You'll have to look at the video. I did all these weird sketches of some kind of underground tube system that allowed craft to come out of the ground vertically. And they're asking here, did I feel this base may have been on Earth? That's a good question. I would say not from the data, but bearing in mind I'm trying to remember what I did four years ago on that. So I would say it was probably off planet, but I can't be absolutely sure on that. I'd have to go back. I'd have to go back and rewatch the video. I haven't rewatched it myself.
You had said forward operating you know, I think that came up in the session, forward operating base. That's the only thing that where a bell went off, and I thought, ooh, maybe.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. Well, if I said that, that's interesting then, because without saying too much, I'm reading and I'm doing some investigative work at the moment on I'm trying to say something without saying too much, on a document, and it says it's a famous remote viewing sessions of a location off planet that he did how many years ago? 16 years ago. And what's interesting is, now you've just reminded me of that, if I said it felt like a forward operating base, this person actually said that the place that he remote viewed was a military outpost. So that's quite interesting that he said that 16 years ago, and I'm thinking I'm probably in the same location. So yeah, I will probably, I'll have to go back and look at my own RV on this now to see what I actually said, because yeah, I didn't review it when I put the videos online, because I don't like to watch myself, so I didn't do that. So yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. I'll double check that now.
Thanks, Daz.
Okay, so another question here, or comment from John Knowles. Daz, you really nailed it. You don't seem to be using CRV stages. Ideogram and off you go. Are you going through the CRV stages in your mind automatically? When I'm on the whiteboard, I've already done the CRV on paper, and I have to be honest now, my CRV now after 20 years is different. which is good. I think it's good. I think it's the right way to go. I think we're all individuals, and you have to learn what works with you as a person. So my CRV changed, and I'm not so strict on it. Like if you, in your first couple of years, I think everyone should be absolutely strict. You should do it the way you're meant to be taught, you know, and it is quite a strict process where you have to do things in set places. But I feel that once you've learned that after a period of years, once it becomes muscle memory, I think then you have to start letting yourself as a personality decide which bits you want to move in and out, slightly adapt and change. So when I do whiteboards on sessions, the CRV is pretty much done on the paper sessions hardcore with my changes, but then the stuff on the whiteboard is pretty much just an extension really of all the stuff that I've done on paper. So I just get myself in the frame of mind and say, okay, I did this a week ago on paper. Now let's try to expand it on the whiteboard and see if I can get any more data for anyone else. Okay, so we've got everyone in at the moment, 34 in. Some more questions here on the list. About the space-time distortion in the same target. It's a sense like, is it a sense like dragging in and out? Again, I can't remember. I did it 4 years ago, and I didn't fully review the RV before I put it up online, so I can't remember everything about it, I'm afraid. Do I feel that a mix of modalities in remote viewing helps to round out the target? Yes, definitely. Yeah. And you know, CRV great. It's a fantastic tool, and all the different formats of CRV are fantastic as well. From all the other people, they all work. But don't, you know, after a couple of years of learning it so that you know you really know what you're doing and it's full muscle memory, then don't be confined by it. Don't allow it to be your prison. Allow it to adapt. CRV is fantastic, and it's the only tool, you know, I've studied a lot of psychic stuff over decades. It's the only tool I've seen that actually takes away the spontaneity and the chaos of the process being in charge of your psychic process. And it allows you to be in control. It's the only one that does that. But at the same time, you know, it was a training methodology that was taught to soldiers to try to get them to be creative and intuitive. It's not the perfect tool for every situation. You know, CRV out of the box for trying to find things, terrible. CRV out of the box for trying to look for missing people, terrible. CRV out of the box for what I'm doing recently with all my stuff with cryptocurrencies. It's terrible. You need to look at the situation you're using and adapt the method you're using and add things and take away things to achieve the goals you need to do. Like for example, missing people. I did 250 missing person cases, a lot of them for the police states in America. And you know, I kind of know, you know, I'm kind of front loading the fact I know I'm looking for a missing person, but that's the only information I have. But CRV out of the box, when it's a tool that's built to describe things, doesn't help when you're trying to find a missing person, because you'd be there going, okay, well, this person, yeah, they're laid down, I think they're dead, they're on a hill, and the hill's in a crevice, there's trees, there's dirt, there's rocks, because you're describing things, you know, you're saying it's dry, you know, there's dry ground, it's really hot. So all the description doesn't, you know, because you can't, in CRV or anything, you can't name things, and you don't anyway. You don't like come up with things and say, okay, he's on 51st Street, he's up on the top of Cranberry Hill or anything like that. It just doesn't come out. It's all descriptive data. So out of the box, CRV is not brilliant for finding missing people. So what I had to do is I had to create my own tools. And one of the things that worked quite well for me was that at some point within the CRV process, I'll make a mark on a sheet of paper and I'll say, okay, this is me, and I'm now looking north, and I draw an arrow going north. I say I'm orientating myself north, and I'm standing on the last known location of where this person was. So someone must have a record of where they were last seen, and I'm looking north from that location. And then I would feel around the sheet of paper with my finger, and I'd feel for a direction, and I would say, okay, well, I feel they're going in this direction, and then I would make a mark there and say, yeah, they're definitely going in this direction with an arrow. And then I would then probe that to see if I could get a distance. So I'd say, okay, I feel they're around about 117 miles away from where they were last seen in this southwesterly direction. So, you know, it's just one of those things where CRV It's fantastic, and all the methods are fantastic. But out of the box, over time, you're going to need to develop them to get them to do some of the things you need to do. Sorry, I went on a bit long there. Bear with me a second, I'm admitting more people in all the time. Okay, we've got some more questions. When I did the JFK RV, did I connect with JFK? Did you feel he knew you were there? No, I don't think so. I think I was still observing that one when he was dying. How far could I follow him? I think I followed him right past the stage of death to where he met the light beings that came and welcomed him. And at that stage, all his emotional connections with the real world stopped. You know, all the caring about all his family, what they were thinking, and all that kind of stuff. Like instantly, just went like the turning off of a switch, and it was just like this complete, not realization. I don't know what the word for it would be, but yeah, he just went for this stage of total acceptance straight away of what was happening and all the love and the light that was around. Yeah, so I saw that. That was interesting. I didn't go any further in that because it wasn't even part of the project to follow him after his death, because I didn't even know, you know, it was blind, so I didn't even know it was a person dying until I was in session. So yeah, I didn't go any further than that in it, really. Yeah. Someone's here asking a question for Brett, if he wants to have a chat. Brett, don't you have a Shiva helmet? What can you tell us about it? Is it any fun?
Yeah, no, actually, thanks, Daz. Nice to say hi to you guys and just hang out. No, I got the Shiva helmet, which I don't know if you guys know what that is. That's from Dr. Persinger's work, the late Dr. Persinger. And he was interested in how electromagnetic fields affects the brain while how it affects psychic abilities, essentially, psi in general. And like Ingo Swann, I think, used it once. Like he had one, basically went up, he experimented with it, and then that was really it. But like Dr. Persinger's kind of protege, I forget his name, he's still making them actually, and they're like, I think it's like $800 or something for him to put it. They're all handmade, and he has a computer program to let you basically do the exact same experiments that Persinger came up with to what he described as it would assist with psi abilities, is essentially was his postulate. And I've definitely played around with it a little bit. It's pretty interesting. I haven't done any long-term experiments with it, but it's kind of was just a pet project that I kind of put together just to see what it was about. I think the actual experience I had with it, I mean, I don't have enough data to say whether or not it assisted or helped at my actual RV sessions. But the sessions themselves were kind of interesting as far as seeing, when I used it a couple times, it would help me actually see some pretty interesting visualizations as far as geometry in the mind's eye during meditation, which I've had previous in my life during meditations, which are kind of interesting. So that popped up a couple times. I'm really not sure what that is. I haven't really looked into it in depth, but it was just a interesting experience as far as part of using it. But I put one together and like have it all on the helmet and stuff, and I could probably grab it in a little bit if people kind of want to see what it looks like. But yeah, that was my experience with it thus far. But yeah,
Great stuff. Okay, anyone got any questions? Do you want to ask Brett on that or anything?
Yeah, I do.
sure.
I was curious. I've heard a couple of individuals, I think one of them was Joe McMoneagle, who said that after doing this for so many years, and I mean, he was still doing it, he became a lot more intuitive just without even needing to do the RV sessions. You know, he does practice RV and he does do the RV work, but he found that in general, he's a little bit more intuitive, or he senses things more easier than he did beforehand. And I was wondering if you've experienced any of that, or if for you still have to go through, if your intuition has increased in any way, shape, I guess is what I want to say.
I would say for me, I started differently from most people because Psi was allowed in my house, and my mother was a psychic medium healer, and she ran the local spiritualist church for I think 20 years. So I grew up with it, and I always had an interest in the age of 9 onwards. So for me, the exposure for me, and I started my training when I was 15. So the exposure for me was more natural, basic, raw intuition right from the very start. And I would say mine's the adverse, really. I do get sparks of natural intuition now that happen spontaneously, but nowhere near as much as it used to back in the early days before CRV. I think I've got to a stage now of 20 years of doing CRV that I hardly get any spontaneous stuff. And when I want it to work, I literally just sit down. I don't even need to cool down anymore. I don't even bother doing those anymore. I literally, either sit here or go out in the garden with my tablet. And they're fantastic, those tablets, by the way. Just literally sit there and take my watch off. I always take my watch off that's just some kind of ritual. And I just say, okay, I'm doing the RV, and that's it. I just do it. But I think for me, the 24 years of using CRV and turning it on and off when I want to do it is made the spontaneous completely fade away in the background, and I hardly get that anymore. Hardly any at all.
Do you like that? Do you like that better, Daz? The fact that you can turn it on and off like that, or did you like it where it was just free flowing? I'm just curious.
I like it the better now because there's the control. The data I can get now in a remote viewing session, 20 pages.
Sure.
It's just so much more in depth than having a spontaneous kind of, ooh, I got this feeling someone's going to call me in half an hour kind of thing. Yeah, it's too fleeting for me. I like the control now. But yeah, I have to be honest. The spontaneous stuff is detrimented, and not only that, my belief is changed as well over these years. I used to everywhere I used to go in my house there used to be covered in crystals and all kinds of esoteric, I would say, junk. But over the years of becoming more and more interested in remote viewing, reading more and more books and literature, and knowing the basis of trying to confirm everything with scientific fact, I've had to question a lot of my old belief in a lot of the old things. I know crystals and stuff work like that, but I'm a bit more skeptical towards everything now. Everything I have to have some kind of feedback system. Just going to let a couple more people in here a second.
I can give another perspective too. Just even, it's interesting your experience as far as like how it kind of switched and gave you more control. Like I would say, just chatting here, I guess what's interesting with me and I've been doing RV for a little over 10 years now. And I think doing it actually turned on the automatic intuition, which was really weird. So before I would say my psi was like literally a rock, it's kind of like pretty dense. And then, I started doing meditation first. And then after doing a lot of meditation, I was introduced to RV and just really enjoyed it. And then I'd say it wasn't until the first time spontaneous stuff started happening was probably not for like 5 years after I was doing it. Now, I'm not saying that's like the number someone experiences. That's just my own personal experience. And it's not all the time, but I think also I wouldn't want it all the time. I imagine belief and intention and all that kind of stuff plays a significant part of it. Usually when it shows up, it's something that is like a warning. It's like an intuitional warning. Hey, don't do X, or hey, you need to do this right away. And then later I get feedback that, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I did, because if I didn't, this would have been really bad, or it was something else. So usually that's the way it's kind of showed up for me. And then I would say every blue moon, I'll get like some sort of like a precognitive dream too, that kind of shows up, which I never had before. So, and then, that's usually simple things. It's like, oh, I've been here. It's like, this will happen. And then like a month later that happens. And it's like, oh, I had a dream about that. So nothing too crazy, I guess. But I'd say I definitely didn't have that before I did RV. So just my own personal experience.
It might be because, I grew up with it. So it was kind of like completely spontaneous to me. And then the control element came in, and because you weren't completely spontaneous, you've got the control and then the spontaneity. I mean, we're all, and I think we need to make allowances within all the methods and all the remote viewing. We're all individuals, so it's going to be, this process is going to be different for all of us, really.
I've been remote viewing a lot less time than you have, and I've had some spontaneous events, but I can't tell. You can't tell if it's dream journaling, if it's meditation, if it's RV, if it's the intersection of all of it. But for example, right before getting out of bed in the morning, I had an image in my head, kind of like a remote viewing visual, something like a hot air balloon, like a stripy feeling up at top and something dangling underneath, and then that sort of turned into an umbrella shape. And when I got up, one of the little trolls that live in my house had been crafting an umbrella out of construction paper and very proudly showed it to me. Or I had a dream that ended up, and all of a sudden, at the end of my dream, another little troll just needed a diaper change. And then I woke up, and my kid, I was like, oh man, there's going to be a bad thing happening here. I tried to take all the steps I could, but there's still just a huge explosion I had to deal with right when I was trying to get to work. So they're not like important things, but they're things. And I think the more that you listen to your subconscious, the more chance there is your subconscious will start talking to you and say, hey, I trust you.
Great stuff. Okay, someone's asked a question.
Definitely.
Someone's asked, what kind of tablet do I use? And I use the same one as, Brett, do you still use your Remarkable? Yeah. So we both use the Remarkables, and I think that's what most of us use at the moment. They are expensive. I did do a review of it. It's on my YouTube channel. It's very expensive, but it does feel like paper. I can show you it here.
For sure. Did you order the new one, Daz? I got pre-ordered. It's coming in July.
I've ordered it.
I'm hopeful it gets delivered.
I'm a technology junkie, so I shouldn't have done. But what can you do? I don't know if you guys can see it there. So you have all these pens and stuff, and I'll pick a pen, fine liner, and I'll pick it on thick. I like thick best. And it really does feel like you're using paper. It has this kind of scratchy feeling to it. And yeah, so it's electronic, and you can just as you can see there, it's really kind of flowing and gorgeous to use. And the great thing is, I was scanning in hundreds of sheets of paper a week, and it's ridiculous, spend an hour scanning it. So once you've done this, you just save your session and you just email it to yourself, and it saves a backup copy to the cloud at the same time. But they are, I will say they are expensive. But I did play with the iPad and some of the other tablets, and I have them for just doing my day-to-day stuff. But they didn't have the same kind of writing feeling on it. The pens on this do have a paper feeling, whereas on the glass-coated tablets, it has that slidey feeling, which just didn't feel right.
Yeah, because you do go through, they're called nibs in the tip of the pen, and you do have to buy the nibs. I do so much writing every day as far as session work and just other things on the tablet that I go through them pretty quick, but they're not too expensive. I mean, you get I think.
Yeah, they're not too bad.
Actually,
although
more.
I've been buying
it's like 12.
I've been buying different pens. I got the Lamy pen. Have you tried that one?
I haven't. No, I'm still using the basic. It's funny. It has I've used it so much it's cracked. I got to re-glue it because it came apart. I've been using it for
And I also have the Staedtler electronic pencil as well, which is quite nice. It's got a nice feel to it because it feels like an old-fashioned pencil, and the nib's a bit more rubbery and bendier on this.
Does it wear down the same way that the Remarkable nibs do?
This one hasn't worn down at all. It's you can't see it very easily, but it's a very pointed nib on that one.
And it works with the Remarkable tablet still?
It does, yeah. And the Lamy one is very nice, and this one also takes the same nibs as the Remarkable one as well, and it's quite a nice heavier kind of feel to the pen, whereas the Remarkable pen, as you know, it's just a bit white and it's a bit
super flimsy.
Yeah,
it's definitely mine.
Great. But
mine definitely is cracked down the middle.
Anyone that's really serious, I think we both recommend these devices. Because obviously they save in paper, and you can literally, you can be on a bus or a plane or anywhere, and you could do your RV and send it to the client. Not only that, these are PDF readers as well, so you can put all your PDFs on there. I do a lot of my research from the Stargate archives on here as well, because I can put the PDFs on here, mark them up, send them to myself and stuff. But as I
Well,
said,
the new one's coming for me.
it's not
The
cheap.
next batch in August, so I'll be moving into it too.
Yeah, and Rick's one of the biggest technology Luddites out there. No, they are good. I do recommend them, but as I said, it's an investment because it's not cheap technology to use.
I was just so sick of just stacks and stacks. Like the amount of RV I do, I had like pages going up to my head just in like saved remote viewing sessions, and it was impossible to organize them all. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna see if this works. Yeah, I remember, man. I've tossed all of mine. I know, man. Like it gets crazy how much free floating paper is everywhere when you're doing so much RV. So this was like a lifesaver. I haven't used paper in over a year after I got the tablet. Everything is digital, so it's really nice to.
Yeah, and I'm learning to like it as well because you can shade with it as well. You know, it's got the brushes and you can do the grays. And I've also recently found out that if I'm careful, I use a plastic ruler. I can actually use a ruler and draw straight lines on it and stuff. So yeah, so that helps. But yeah, so it's a great device. Whoever asked that question, I can't remember who that was. Bear me and admit someone else. So 42 in tonight. Okay, yeah, so that's the tablet one. That was Tony. Would Brett be interested in talking about his UFO encounter that led him down the road of RV?
I mean, I guess I could. It's a really short story. I don't know. I mean, I've written about it before, and I guess I've definitely talked about it before and other things, like briefly, but it's just a short experience. I mean, I was living in the Bay Area at the time, and I used to smoke cigarettes way back then. This is like 12 years ago now. So quit, but since then, but I'd work late at night because I was into character animation at that time, and really big into art. And so I'd work late. Those were like my prime working hours. And I'd always go out, have a cigarette before I went to sleep. It was like 1 a.m. in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I just looking up at the stars, the few you could see. Now the corner of my eye, there was movement in the sky. And I thought it was like a helicopter or something at first. And as I look at this a little bit more closely, it's an enormous triangle flying really slowly over the San Francisco Bay Area that had 3 fairly bright lights on each point, and then a darker, dimmer, orangish red one in the middle. And it kind of went slowly right over my head. And I was in the backyard of a house where I was renting a room at the time. And so I ran to the front of the house after I was watching this happening, kind of tracked it for another period of time. And then it just, if you've seen Star Trek, it essentially did what you see in Star Trek. It's without any sound. It just fast like a bat out of hell, like just instant snap. It was beyond the horizon and gone, because I could see pretty far from where I was out over the bay. So it was like going over the bay in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then it just shot like a bullet out of a gun in the sky. It was like no sound. The lights kind of streaked a little bit, like if someone was like moving a light really quickly, but I mean, it didn't leave trails or anything. But and then was gone. And so obviously, that changes your worldview a little bit about what's real when you experience something like that. Like, okay, clearly I obviously don't know what's going on here in this place called a planet and a human life, but the human experience. So it definitely got me to open up and explore different things. And I mean, the first kind of avenue I went was more meditative practices first. I was like, I wonder what these books are about meditate. I mean, I looked in a whole bunch of different areas, but the thing that really kind of called me first was like meditative stuff for whatever reason that I discounted earlier in my life. And then one thing led to another. I remembered hearing a show about remote viewing on Art Bell years and years and years ago, because my grandma used to listen to her. My great grandma used to listen to Art Bell, and I heard one about remote viewing. I was like, I wonder if that thing's real. I was just ordered a DVD set and ended up like really taking a liking to it. And that was kind of the beginning. I mean, it's like a compressed version of it, but that's kind of was my experience and why I'm doing what it is today. And it's still exciting today. Like every time I sit down and do a session, Like it's just an exciting thing to do, to get feedback, you know, it's, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is cool. So, I mean, the things I'm focused on right now are more, well, almost everything I'm focused on right now is pretty much market related. So it's kind of gone private at the moment, but it's still really fun. But that's kind of the origin story of how I'm sure everyone has their own, you know, experience of what they did, you know, mine's just one, but yeah.
We got some questions here, Brett, about your camera. Someone wants to know what kind of camera you have, because your picture quality is very good.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of video calls with clients and stuff. So I'm using actually a GH5 Panasonic camera. So it's an actual video camera. And so I have like a whole video recording setup for this. So it's not just a webcam, it's like a $2,000 video camera that's basically plugged into my computer. That's why the quality is really high.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you want the same, I mean, you can get cheaper cameras than this one and get better, but you know, ultimately it depends what your use case is, right? Mine is I just do a ton of video calls with clients and stuff. So it's kind of, I upped my production game for live calls.
Yeah,
but yeah, so that's what that is. Yeah.
Excellent. So is anyone on the video or anyone got any questions they want to ask, rather not in the chat? Anyone got anything you want to discuss?
Daz, it's Martin.
Hi there.
Hi. When you remote view a target like the Roswell incident, can you revisit the target at a later date without being sort of loaded? Can you actually tune back into it?
Do you mean if someone else tasked me on it, or the same person?
Let's say you yourself wanted to, say, probe one of the beings in the structure in 15B, where the craft were landing.
Yeah.
Say you wanted to go into their mindset. Could you sort of revisit that target without too much bother, or?
Well, that's a good question. I wouldn't do it myself because I never have. I would do it if the project was still live and I didn't have any feedback at that stage. But I wouldn't never, you know, now that I know about the project, I wouldn't go back myself and think, okay, maybe I'll go back and have another look, see what else I can find. That's not something I would do, and I never have. But yeah, if the project was still live and I didn't have conclusion, you know, some of the RV like the if you have a look at the paper sessions from that Roswell one, there are, I think, 4 or 5 paper sessions. So I've gone back continuously over 4 or 5 times to get more and more data. So I've done it that way. But yeah, I wouldn't do it if I knew what the target was, because I wouldn't know if it was imagination or proper stuff.
Yeah. One other thing. Do you actually remember talking about the way the object in that session moved in sort of point to point?
Vaguely, wasn't it on some kind of S curve type? I can't, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. It was
not in great detail because it was nearly 4 years ago. So it's
right. I briefly looked through it today, and you mentioned that the object seemed to move from point to point, and it was sort of iridescent. So it just reminded me of a few objects that I've seen. For those that don't know, I've seen objects since I was a very young boy, like on a constant basis. I've actually managed to call them in as well, sort of like a CE5 type thing. So about 3 of these objects have been what I would describe as pearlescent ovals, and they actually moved similar to what I thought you described, which they sort of pulsed in short bursts from a sort of, I don't know how far, but when I looked at them, they sort of just went from pulsing along at the same sort of gap,
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting, having seen your session.
To be honest, I can't personally remember on that one. I just put it up live today, and as I said, I didn't really read or watch it or anything. I have done other more recent UFO projects, and one of them was for, and I've discussed this before, one of them was for the Shoot for the Stars people, the Tom DeLonge project. And I did describe on that one in great depth how that one moved in time and space, and I do remember that one because that one was really interesting, the way that one moved, because it kind of as it moved from one point to another, it phased in and out of time and space. So it became non-physical as it moved, and then physical again as it reached its destination. So that was quite interesting on that one.
Yeah. Okay, cheers.
So we've got some more questions here.
Actually, Daz, I've got a comment on where you guys are right now. Good to see you, by the way. You did a
comment about
project with Courtney Brown a while back that I found interesting, and I never got a chance to talk with you about this, but it was one of the Courtney Brown viewing the moon projects where a spacecraft seems maybe to have landed.
Yeah.
Do you recall his more recent one? It was like a long cigar shaped
I wonder
craft.
if I could just say something about the thing we were just talking about before we move on to that moon thing. I watched your video, half of it, about the Roswell remote viewing, and I found that spacecraft very interesting. I went and I sort of tried to visualize how its engine would work, and what I kind of saw was the light that you were seeing. The surface of the craft was really the engine. So this material that this craft was made of is a kind of engineered material, and it can create an electromagnetic, it spins. And that's interesting because I remember I was telling you about these interdimensional creatures that I see, and they spin. And I saw that this surface of the craft would spin across its surface. It's it's an interdimensional property that is being made use of, particles that this thing is made out of. And it spins and it creates a magnetic field. The electrical properties of the particles, when they spin, create a magnetic field. And this is a gravitational field, and so it's very powerful. And as you say, it sort of skips across like warp speed. So it pulls space to it and skips. So it'll take a long distance, and by revving up its engine, the space it wants to, the distant point, is pulled towards it, and it just hops. And then it releases behind. So you can see it hopping along as it goes. So I kind of got a really kind of good idea about how it would work. I don't know exactly how you build it. I did the same thing when I was thinking about the robot Data, and I wrote an essay about it and how his brain would work. And I eventually found a theory, the Penrose-Hameroff theory of gamma synchronies in the brain that fits how I kind of had this visualization of how a robot brain would work. So now I was trying to think, well, how would you build this engine that would make this thing move this way? And that's kind of my theory, how that thing would move. And it's totally doable. I mean, you know, in theory. I'm just not sure about what material you'd be, how you would build that material exactly to create the magnetic field. But I think what you saw is a real thing, what I'm trying to say. And it's actually something that could be accomplished. But I have a question. So I just had one sort of adjunct question about the signal. I'm wondering if when you go back to a target, do you think you ever go back on the same signal, or is it a different signal, or how would you think about that?
Anyone want to answer that one?
And maybe we can go back to Fabian. I want to hear his story.
Well, I just have a quick answer for her. Whenever you're doing the signal line, I found that actually when I go back to the signal line to either refresh my information or, you know, even if I do the ideogram again, I'm back at the exact same place. So I don't.
You would say you're in the same signal, because this is a question I have. Like, do the two people viewing the same site? Are they on different signals or the same signal? And
I personally end up at the same signal. So
well,
I'm at the same place.
Yeah. What about if someone else is there? Have you ever been to a place where someone else is at the same time? Like.
You mean like another remote viewer viewing at the same time?
Yeah, like on a team, for instance, if there's 2 or 3 of you are remote viewing the same thing, like, do you think that you would be on the same signal as them, and would it make a difference? And some people say they can see people at targets, and I'm wondering if that's maybe because they're on the same signal, whereas if they can't see each other.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah, but I haven't experienced that. I have remote viewed with a group. We were all in training, so we were all, you know, tasked the exact same thing. Right. I have never experienced anybody else being at the site with me. I'm just getting my impressions. Daz may be able to answer that, or somebody else may be able to answer that better, but me personally, I have not.
I think when Ingo used the term signal many years ago, it was just a way then of communicating his methodology. I don't think there is a signal. I don't think we go anywhere. I think, you know, we just, you know, we're accessing info. If quantum entanglement works, and I think it is down to quantum physics and entanglement and the holographic universe, everything about every target or every location in the universe already exists within the molecules of us. So I just think, you know, all the information is actually within us anyway. We're not going anywhere. So and that's the reason why I don't think, and I know there are some remote viewing cases where remote viewers have said they've been seen at targets, but that's always been by aliens, not by other remote viewers. I've never seen a recorded session, and I've looked at thousands where remote viewers recorded and said, "Oh look, I've seen my teammate, you know, my teammate from the other side of the world at a target and stuff."
Why would you think that would be? Like, why wouldn't you see them, I wonder?
Well, because you don't actually go anywhere. We don't go to targets.
That's true, but the signal, there is information coming to you, and it's coming to you, and it's coming to them, and you're sharing it. There's some connection there, you know. And the way I've been thinking of it, I jotted down a note that I think the signal, when the signal reaches your eye, just in real life, that signal is an unbroken signal from the thing you're seeing to your eye. Once it hits your eye, the signal's broken. So I'm thinking that when we see something with RV, we're seeing an unbroken signal from something. And that signal comes from the beginning of the universe. All signals come from the beginning of the universe. So you can trace that signal all the way back. And everything that signal went through and touched, you could see. That's the way I'm kind of looking at it. So you could see, you could follow that signal all the way back to the beginning and see the beginning of the universe. And even before that, possibly, according to Penrose, there's a universe that seems to be peeking through, and you can see it in the background radiation. But I'm curious about the signal because I'm looking into this quantum computer, and I think you could train it, but you'd need to locate the signal, you know, to be able to follow it. I think, at least know if the computer had done it. And that's kind of my interest anyway. I'm just sort of a bit of a techie, of course.
Deborah,
On to the moon.
It's interesting what you're talking about there, Deborah, because I've given a lot of thought to your questions about the signal. And have you considered that it could be something like an internet search? What remote viewers are doing, that they're not, like Daz says, it's not necessarily that you're going somewhere. It's that the information might be holographically stored throughout the entire universe. So you're not going anywhere. You're just kind of like an internet search. You're at your computer and the information is coming to you. That's kind of how I use it.
Well, the way I see it is based on the model of Hammeroff and Penrose's model of the brain. You have a type of wave in your brain called a gamma synchrony. And the gamma synchrony is very different than the other kinds of brain waves. It's a synchrony, so it spreads out over a couple 100,000 neurons at a time simultaneously. And to do this, it tunnels. It travels backward in time a few milliseconds, fractions of a millisecond. And it rises into this synchrony, this wave, consciousness wave in your brain. They rise into the density matrix. So you don't have to go anywhere because that's where the signal is received. You find the signal in the density matrix, which is a complex space. So it's interdimensional. And you can just sit there and access the whole entire universe without going anywhere, which is incredible. That's why I like this theory. But you do kind of experience the reality of the thing because you are in connection to a signal that hasn't actually touched the thing that you're experiencing. You see?
If no
That's
part
why
of
you
you
can,
is actually going anywhere, how are people getting spotted?
well, this is my question. Can you, and what would that mean? That would be my question. And if aliens can see you, that's they have an interdimensional consciousness or have developed it better than us. So that would be a goal we should have maybe to try. See if we can see
So
each
I have
other. Send two people, you know,
I have
an experiment.
Deborah, ultimately here's, I mean, I'll just share my thoughts on this because I've definitely put a lot of thought on this. And I think ultimately though, where I start is that no matter what the truth is on this case, there's going to be feedback unless some of the science kind of gets up to the point where we can objectively prove, you know,
Actually,
whether it's holographic, whether it's something else.
There's
it's
a guy
very difficult.
in Japan, and he's built some instruments to measure the gamma synchronies in your brain. And this
there's definitely experiments out there. And yeah, and I
I'm
definitely
saying
think
is
that one day we'll know
waves,
very clearly.
They have harmonics in them. They are extremely complex and they can be read, and the information that they're getting off of these waves could possibly answer some of these questions that you're raising. That's what I'm saying. I've done a lot of research and thought about this for quite a number of years, and I just can't believe I found this group. So sorry, I'm just plunking down a bunch of thoughts I've had over the years. I've never been able to ask anybody. So I'm not trying to come on strong or anything, but I find this so fascinating. It interests me.
I think it's definitely fast. It's definitely really, I would agree with you completely. It's definitely really interesting. And I think ultimately, I mean, it's in the stage of what's the hypothesis, right? We're not even at the theory stage with, you know, this. Well, I mean, I don't know, at least I haven't read things at a theory stage, but it's like the best guess. And I think, I mean, I have my own postulate, a best guess of what it seems like. And it's very similar to what you said, Daz, the idea of like, it doesn't seem like I'm going anywhere. It's just the information's available in your brain as a receiver for information. And so it's just what
I know,
dials,
but I mean, when you're talking about a
into?
nuclear bomb or something, you don't want to guess. You want to be sure. And if you're working for intelligence, which I don't work for intelligence, but I mean,
well, this is the interesting thing about remote viewing, though. The interesting thing about remote viewing is we don't need to know how it works to actually use it. That's the crazy part about it. Is that when they did the research,
that's just fine. But the thing is, if you know how it works, you could use it better. Is all I'm saying. And I mean, I've been in church, say, for years, and you see the different sort of gradations of people who've, you know, wanted to grow in their faith and whatnot. And for some people, it's just fine. Stay at the early stage, and you don't ask too many questions, and you're fine with that. But me, I like to know stuff. And some people want to progress, and they want to expand. And even this field, I feel it's quite incipient, even though you guys have done such amazing work. Like, just in the short time that I've done research, seriously, I said, I think to Russell, my head exploded when I found Stargate. Like, I just can't believe what I have found. And you guys don't realize, but I think you do, but most people don't. What we're doing with this phenomenon. So I guess right now I'm really enthusiastic because I've just discovered it. I'll probably calm down in a bit, but
Sure.
you know, I see a lot of potential, you know.
Hey, I'm going to butt in with an idea. Can we go back to Fabian? Let Fabian finish what he was saying before he was interrupted. And then when he's done, I'd like to put in an idea on the signal line. So Fabian, I'd love to hear what you were going to finish.
Oh, well, thank you. Actually, what I was going to say is relevant to what Deborah was saying as well at the beginning of this regarding the, I guess, the travel that the UFOs that Daz kind of saw. She saw a propulsion that involved the electromagnetism. And what I found interesting was in Daz's remote viewing with Courtney Brown on the Moon Project. Now, I watched the whole video, but what really stood out for me is, Daz, specifically what you said, when you said that the UFO seemed to pop in to a place near the moon. Do you recall what I'm talking about? What viewing?
Vaguely. But are you aware as well that I've done that target now 3 times for 3 different taskers over 13 years?
I was not aware of that.
Yeah. Bear with me a sec. I can share my screen here a sec. So I post. It's on my website.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did it for Courtney. But I also did the exact same target for two other taskers over a 13-year period, and all 3 of the targets are all showing the same data. They're all there. You can download all the RV sessions there on my website for it. So I'll post a link for this in the chat window there as well.
Excellent. Now, Daz, before you navigate away from your data there, are you able to pull up the page of what you drew when the UFO seemed to pop into reality or pop into our dimension?
Bear with me a sec. Let's have a look here. The Courtney Brown one. Let me see what I can open up here.
Yeah, his most recent Moon Project. It was really striking to me because of some of the research I happened to be doing at the time that he posted this video. I was very impressed by what you drew because there is a scientific term for what you drew, and I don't know if you're aware of it.
Bear with me a sec. Okay, so would it be here describing the motion?
Yes, I'm not seeing the particular image yet. You seem to draw like a, almost like a helix shape.
Okay, bear with me a sec. Because I can't remember off the top of my head. So,
yeah.
Let me see if I can make this. Can I make this smaller? Yeah, that's better. I think I did 2 for Courtney on it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be very beneficial for people to see what you've done here, because I've done some research completely unrelated to remote viewing that it was funny because it's almost like you verified some of my research and we were not discussing any of this together at the time.
So it's not in that one, so it might be in the second one. Yeah, because I can't remember off the top of my head because I do so many targets that it all mushes into one after a while.
Yes, and the moment I see it, I'll let you know. And this is, okay, this is starting to look familiar. And the moment you get to the specific, that second image looks good, but there's another one you drew that was even better after this. And this does go back to what Deborah was just mentioning about the electromagnetism. That there is one of the images right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's very interesting is my older brother and I have always had a fascination with futuristic ways of traveling. And back in the 1930s, are you familiar with a scientist who did not share the same viewpoints as Einstein, named Birkeland?
No, no.
Okay. During the 1930s, there was a scientist named Birkeland who was researching the ways that the sun interacts with the earth through electromagnetism. And he theorized that there might be what he called, well, or what we call now Birkeland currents, which is an electromagnetic connection between all the planets in our solar system and the sun onto other solar systems. It's just an electromagnetism that is throughout the entire universe. And this is all theoretical. Anybody who has ever followed the research of the Thunderbolts group, who works with the electric universe, these are theories of theirs, and they believe in what's called a cosmic web. And so this is an electromagnetic web. And they say that you can ride these currents from one solar system to another, from planet to the sun, and so on. And so it's been theorized by some people that that might be how UFOs get around so quickly. They're riding currents through space. And what I thought was particularly interesting about your data there is how you drew them, because Birkeland said they would be in a helix-like shape. It would be 2 to 3 electric filaments that connect all of these different places, these points in space. And so when you said that the UFO kind of popped in from what you thought was a wormhole, because you didn't have any other terminology, you just said, well, maybe it was a wormhole or something. The first thing I thought was, wow, he just drew a Birkeland current the way that the scientists have been drawing them since the 1930s. So I was very impressed by that. I thought you should know. And back to what Deborah was saying regarding electromagnetism, it's interesting that, well, basically what my brother and I were looking at, what he kind of determined was that in order to ride a Birkeland current, you would have to, I guess, polarize your spaceship so that it could ride along the currency, the proper electric frequency. Magnetism, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. If you can create the pole shift on your own ship, it would propel you along the current. So I guess the two of you were kind of saying something very similar there, but I was very interested, and I wanted to let you know that that's what I thought when I saw your drawings during that project.
Thanks. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and if you get the chance, have a look at the other RV as well, because it's my only project that I have where I've been targeted pretty much the same object by 3 different taskers independently over something like a 13-year period. So it's kind of interesting to see what the 3 different data sets get, because there are all these questions like, does the tasker's intent drive what the remote viewer reports back to them? But in this case, it was 3 different taskers were 3 different, obviously, intents on what they want the remote viewer to find there, but all the data came back the same anyway.
That's awesome. It's very interesting how that worked out, and it worked for my interests as well. Just not even related to remote viewing. I was just interested in how could a craft very quickly go from one solar system to another, and then the idea of Birkeland currents came up, and that has always been one of my interests. And I never tasked it to my group or anything. I was always just kind of curious what people would come up with, and I was just very impressed that you drew something that I've been aware of for a very long time. So good on that one.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
All right, I'll jump in. Thank you, Fabian. I'm back to the signal line for just a minute. Even in the control remote viewing manual, both editions, Tom's and the collaborative between Tom and the rest of the crew, often they have signal line in quotes, and they repeatedly refer to it as hypothesize. So just without going too deep into the topic, Ingo, from his prior training, would never have believed in an actual signal line. The best analogy to give of what
Can I say
they,
something, Russell, though, just quickly?
no, not
Because
right now.
that theory
Will you
didn't
please
exist.
quit?
I have attention deficit disorder, and my attention is really fading.
Carry on, Russell. Carry on.
Okay, so one analogy that comes out of this that people were trying to explain back in the day, even before Ingo had moved into SRI, it's kind of an interesting analogy. It's a little weak, like all analogies, but if you can imagine turning on a flashlight and the wall lights up, but there's no photons in between. So the signal line is not, you know, you turn on the flashlight, the wall lights up, but there's no photons. The signal line, so, you know, repeatedly in the CRV manual, they refer to it as hypothesized, they even put quotes. I don't think anybody legitimately believe there's actual travel of information from one location to another. That's one thing. A couple people were talking about this, how do these things hop? One time we were real fortunate in Paul's intermediate class to ask Hal some of these questions, being a physicist. So Hal told us a really fascinating story. They had a woman who apparently was standing upright and then somehow got levitated horizontally, but in that unit of space she was in, her dress was still flowing towards where gravity was if she had been upright. So it wasn't like where the magician goes like this and the dress goes this way. Her dress was still. So the way Hal put it, and obviously when, you know, he wasn't able to fully explain it in our level of understanding, but he said somehow they're sculpting time and space. So what that meant, I don't know if they're able to create a chunk and then a chunk and then a chunk and hop from chunk to chunk. But when he told that example of the woman's dress flowing horizontally towards her feet and then tried to give that explanation, of course, none of us ever physicists, so I don't know how to explain it. And then the last thing that I wanted to say, you know, one thing, in this topic of being spotted and everything, more and more and more viewers have reported. I believe actually even Brad in one of his videos talked about something that happened with he and Ed Dames. Daz has had an experience. Paul recently explained himself, at least on his report, noting that he perceived he had been spotted by something on the moon. The question that I have is, if there was no physical component to it, what did the magnetometer detect? When Ingo put his attention on the magnetometer, what did it detect? So for me, that's always kind of a driving baseline to try to resolve that issue. Unless something tickled the sensor, that thing wouldn't have indicated. So anyways, not to bring up that whole thing. And Deborah, thank you very much for the time. I have no animosity towards you. I'm very happy you're so enthusiastic. But let's
Okay, Rob, just take another shot. Okay, fine.
All right, I'm over and out. Thank you, guys.
I have two thoughts on what Russell said.
May I say something about what Russell? Okay, I'm.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Owen. I've talked quite a bit.
I was in that thing quite a lot, in that experiment of Ingo's, and I'm thinking of, you know, that law that just observing the experiment changed the outcome, and that was just something else. It's not about doing something in our physics, in our world, in terms of what do we know about physics, you know? It's just observing, and that transcends, I believe, our world as we know it. Just this. I'm done. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say you've worked with magnetometers before?
No. I said I'm not a physician. I'm not working in physics, you know. But this just observing an experiment changed the outcome. This is the law, as I understand. No. It's like the Schrodinger and somehow the other ones. Yes, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, okay, now I understand. Thank you. I
Okay,
missed,
okay. I'm
yeah.
sorry if my language, and I'm very shy in speaking in front of people. Is why I'm not quite understanding
Oh
what
no,
you said.
I appreciate it and I understand. So you're, yeah, the observer effect. So okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, no, that was very definitely an interesting idea. So that, yeah, it's like, I think they talked about this the last IRVA conference, where it's like you can never remove. I mean, this is like in science though. You can never remove the observer or the effect essentially of knowing what the experiment is. You know, you can't take that. You can't take the scientist out of the experiment. So at least that's the big bugbear of it. But I had two thoughts on what you were saying, Russell. The first is, I wonder, obviously I don't know, these are just the thoughts. The first is whether or not what Ingo was doing to affect the magnetometer, I think that's how you say it, right? That was, essentially it's buried in cement, right? And it's very, very sensitive to I think the rare particles, it's like space particles, I think is what it picks up on. I'm not 100%.
I think they were looking for neutrinos.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wonder if that's the exact same thing or the same modality of how RV actually works. And so if he maybe was doing something differently to affect it, and therefore the comparison to RV is using that same thing to affect something or to go somewhere, maybe it might be the same thing. It's just like an idea. Maybe it could have been just a totally different modality that he was expressing there.
Yeah, I mean, and since you and I were sitting right next to each other when we listened to Dr. Mitchell's talk at IRVA, which was entitled, Is There a Physical Component to, so she gave those stories, which were fairly profound, and then some of her work on this, trying to figure out. Now, the term I have seen recently that I think comes close, that I kind of like, is this idea of a biophoton, whatever that is. Similar possibly, but even maybe more minute than a neutrino. So when she in that conversation used the term attention units, there is a pre-established definition, but in her book on out-of-body stuff, she talks about training Ingo at ASPR. And so she literally tells how he learned to tell colors, all these different things. But several times in that book too, she used the word attention units. So when you read To Kiss the Earth Goodbye, Ingo goes into the magnetometer experiment in a different explanatory mode than he does anywhere else. And he says what caused that magnetometer to react is the impact of observation. I can't find him using that term anywhere else except in that book, but he, you know, you've got to remember that the surface of that detector, those neutrinos, I mean, there's millions of them passing through each of us right now, continuously. Somehow that surface was sensitive enough, and that's why they had it encased and shielded and buried, so that nothing else except for a neutrino could activate it. So whatever happened, when he started his sketch, that's when the thing jumped. And then he says he placed his attention down there. So, you know, I mean, I can't say. I've never been spotted, and I don't have any personal experience, but the evidence, and I agree with Daz, there's never been an account where they were spotted by a human. So it might be that advanced ET telepathy that Ingo even said took place on the moon. And then he said something mysterious and didn't follow up in the book Penetration. Telepathy plus something else. So I don't know if that was like an energetic detector, AI, you know, whatever. But anyways, and by the way, Brett, it's nice to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, no, it's nice to see you. And yeah, same, Russell. If I could just, I'll say one other quick thing on this, because I mean, Russell, I've talked to you about this privately before. I think I told you about, I mean, you do, because you brought it up. I mean, this was early on, this was like 2 years into when I was doing remote viewing, this is when I did one-on-one practice, just training with dames. And for whatever reason, he decided to give me a target to go into and describe the location of one of Pat Price's underground alien bases that he had been passed along to Hal Puthoff. And he basically said, go to these coordinates and describe. And it was, now, I mean, nowadays, I'm not super enthused about running those types of targets just because of personal reasons, but I got other things I'm interested in focusing on. But at the time, it's like I described, essentially it was interesting. It was like until I got to the life form. Once I got to the life form and started probing EIs and getting emotional impacts, the entire like stream of data that was coming through spontaneously changed. The like textural feel of it changed, and I was getting descriptors of stop, what are you doing? It's as if someone was like, the words I was hearing and as I was writing down in stage 4s was like, stop, what are you doing? Stop, stop, stop. So every descriptor I was getting next was stop, after I started probing basically the emotional impact of the life form in this underground place. And so then I'm like, okay, I don't know what the hell's going on in the session, but I'm kind of creeped out a little bit. And so I stopped, and then he gave me the feedback of what it was after that. So how that happened, why that happened, obviously there's no way for me to know just by nature of the target, right? I can't go to that coordinate, which was, it's not easy to get to and see, I wonder if there's an underground base here. You know what I mean? But
am I misremembering? Whoops, sorry. Am I misremembering? Because I thought on your YouTube video where you told the story, I thought you said dames pulled you out or said something like, okay, that's enough, or did.
He did say that's enough. So but I put the pen down first, and I said, I don't know what's happening right now, because I'm getting really, this doesn't make sense. It's like after that, when I was probing different columns in stage 4, I wasn't getting streamed data anymore. I was just getting with the word stop over and over and over again. Maybe that was me. I mean, for all I know, maybe that was my own unconscious saying, stop doing this, and it kind of, I've never had that happen before. So again, it was a weird experience. I can't say either way exactly what it was, other than it's that target type. Other people with that type of target have had sometimes, rarely, once or twice had a similar experience. And I can't really conclude anything further than that, right? Other than that was the experience of it. If that makes sense.
Well, and not that it's precise feedback, but multiple viewers working on Project 8200, i.e. the bases that Pat Price gave to Skip, and that Skip then gave to Ed. There were multiple viewers and viewers of substance that also had the experience of, or the sensation of being spotted. And one interesting footnote that you might not be aware of, Brett, there's a video that of Skip Atwater's 2009 Talk, and in it he just incidentally mentions when he started when he put dames to task the CRV viewers, because he did the stuff in '82 with Joe McMonagle, 6 sessions, put it away, and then he thought, hey, these would be good practice for our new CRV viewers, Paul, Bill Ray, numerous others. Ed Dames was blind. So at what point Ed knew that these were ET targets, maybe after feedback, but I was really surprised to hear Skip say, when he first tasked those viewers via Ed as the monitor, Ed was blind to the target. So they were double blind targets, and Ed was blind himself. Obviously, at some point, he figured out what it was and then started tasking those type of targets. But I found it interesting that Ed was blind.
That is interesting. I didn't know that.
If you're talking about whether somebody could be spotted, I have 2 examples from humans, and I don't know if anyone's experienced anything like this, but Dave Morehouse teaches his ERV classes. John Orlowski wrote about them, and Orlowski recounts how Dave in a class went down himself and went to a target and guided people into the target, which I think was the wreck of the Titanic, and somehow manifested for other people who were in this in-between liminal state, manifested like a flashlight or a beacon for them to come to target. Or maybe some people perceived somebody waving. And then John, when he later became a trainer, had a student that he saw was struggling, So John, who's had this super soldier meditation training from the Trojan 2 project or something like that, when he was police, he went down and he did the same thing for that student, or at least they reported having observed him. And so that's recorded in his book, A Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is kind of like his remote viewing training diary of experiences. And, you know, how much you believe it or don't believe it, I'm not sure, but John's very active on Facebook, and it'd be interesting to hear more about these experiences from him.
I think you could definitely set up research for this to test it, you know, if you're able to get the right amount of people together for this, and then just do like a month-long study on if people can get feedbackable information on where they are. And then, but then it begs the question, are you just remote viewing what the person is doing? And then you're like conflating the things. So, I mean, it's definitely worth more investigation, I think.
It would be hard to do a proper experiment. But as I said, you know, like some of us here, I've worked, you know, joint projects, you know, for years. Like, you know, let's take just CryptoView, and we've been working together for 3 years. Got a team of four or five remote viewers, all work in the same projects, week after week after week. Not one single occurrence ever of saying, "Oh, look, I've just seen Dick at the same target site as I'm at." It just doesn't happen. It's never been recorded. And the cases I am hearing, like, you know, the ones that just been coming out, I mean, I can understand a possibility of it with ET or extra dimensional life forms, because they're not humans. They might be using a different modality than we are, but it's never been recorded with humans in remote viewing, and I've never seen a case of it. You know, I'd like to see it. I'm a person that needs to see evidence. So if someone says that they've seen another remote viewer, I want to see both remote viewers' RV sessions to see them actually recording seeing each other at a target site, but I've never seen it.
Yeah. So I like to just throw my 2 cents into that. I was trained by David Morehouse, and I'm fortunate we're going back some time. And you're right, with remote viewing, coordinate remote viewing as is, you really don't do that. But one of the way Dave liked to remote view was not with CRV, but with extended remote viewing, which he also taught. I never took that class, but in that class, the protocol was you didn't get a lot of sleep. And basically you would lie down, you would have blinders in your eyes, and you would create a sanctuary in your mind. And from that sanctuary, you would wait for a vortex to open, which would take you to the target. And he then, when he was telling us, you know, about the protocols, I remember him talking about friends that he's taught all over the world, some of which he would meet in that alternate reality. And he would recognize them. And then afterwards he could, you know, once he was back from the target, they would communicate and they would talk about each other's experience, which sounded extremely, extremely out there. But then again, this isn't exactly typical to most people. So that was what he shared with us.
Again,
it's pretty much the Monroe Institute.
But I'd like, you know, I would, as a scientist, I'm an amateur scientist, I would have to see independently recorded blind remote viewing sessions of each person seeing that they saw each other.
May I interject here for a second? I have an idea. The way I try to think of tasks for groups in situations like this is come up with a possible hypothesis for how something would work and then see how to test that specifically. And my approach to everything from, I guess, a scientific viewpoint that people might be able to understand is oftentimes computers. Because computers can create a ground floor of understanding in terms of what we might be doing. So one of my thoughts in terms of people who say they have been detected by extraterrestrials, especially in Ingo Swann's situation, what if it's not exactly that the extraterrestrials on the moon witnessed him directly, but what if when you remote view, you are tapping into an information field, something like that. So if you consider it more of an information field and not so much a place, an event, at all this stuff, you're just tapping into raw data that happens to be recorded, then who's to say that extraterrestrials that seem to be reacting to you are not really reacting to your presence, but rather you're logging on to a system that they're accessing. So you can say that, okay, we see that somebody just logged on and they are remote viewing through the system. So this is something that people in computer fields are always used to. If somebody logs into their database, they can say, oh, well, we see that Daz has just logged in here. You know, as I joined this meeting tonight, I was detected and then accepted and allowed into the Zoom meeting. So what if remote viewing works in a similar way? It's like a network that you can log into almost by your focus and with the paper. That's your interface to the situation. So now this is all just an idea, but I try to approach these things from what am I used to? And computers are something that everybody's using all the time. And so to view remote viewing in that same exact way, it might give you something testable. You can look at it and say, okay, well, maybe there is some kind of detection that can happen in a way that everybody can see it. Anybody, and if extraterrestrials are further along and they have some kind of a developed system where all of them are logged on, like this is a database, then as soon as somebody accesses it, they'll go, oh, wait, stop. This is not information you should be able to see. This is, we've got a firewall up here and you just kind of broke through. So that, I guess, is kind of what Brett was saying earlier. To get that stop thing, that might be them just simply saying, you're not allowed to log into this site right now. So that could give you a baseline. I've just made it up just now listening to you guys, but you can kind of, maybe that's a testable theory, and a target can be drawn up to see, are we working with something like a large neural network that's available to everyone?
Hey, Daz.
Fabian, I had a, if I can, Russ, do you mind if I just respond to that real quick?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Okay, sure. Just one quick thing, Fabian. Interesting. The firewall analogy, I think, is interesting because, but I've never seen that actually in reality. There's never been, I've never been tasked to target blind where I haven't been able to get information back. Even in that case, in that scenario, I still described what was there. It's just once I got to the emotional state of the life form, I was like, I was getting, what are you doing? Stop kind of a thing. And so I was so freaked out by it that I stopped, right? And as well as my monitor was like, you probably should pull. And he actually later apologized to me because I was like, I never asked to go there and do that. You know what I mean? But I think I've actually had what you're saying, Fabian, has been a hypothesis of mine for a while. If the idea of it's all information, you're going to a Google, like you mentioned, I think it was you, Fabian, that said it's like a Google search. And but what if there are little alarm bells on going to certain websites? And then, like, this is just completely a metaphor, right? It's like, imagine there's an alarm bell if you view a certain thing. And then what if you're advanced enough, you can put an alarm bell on yourself to say, oh, the alarm bell is going to let you know that you're being viewed. It's not really that you're detecting the person. You're just, your alarm bell that you have the ability to set up is going off. And so then now you're going to know to look at the information of who's looking at you right now. So maybe it's something like, now I could be way off base, obviously. It's just complete, just random idea of what might be so. But it's just, I've definitely thought about it through that lens before, that maybe it's, you know, it's a database, an informational database that with certain techniques, perhaps you can put alarm bells on information on yourself, on something else, and then see who's logged into that website, to that information, and trace it back, which is an idea of, well, if that's true, I'm not saying it is, it puts a new spin a little bit on being responsible with what you look at sometimes. just to throw that out there. But yeah.
And the possibility of getting viruses.
Daz, can I do a quick screen share for Fabian? Fabian, what you said just rang a bell in line with, in fact, I just took a picture of this page of Ingo's book, Penetration. Read this real quick and see if this aligns with what you said, because yours is the first framework that might give me some hope in understanding what the heck this was. So hold on one second. Let me get it up for you.
Okay.
While you're getting it up on the screen, let me waste your airtime here. My question is, if there's a thing that triggers alarm bells, what the heck is that thing?
I'm not even going to mess with what that thing might be.
I think I might have something to add on that just after we've.
Can you read that, Fabian?
Now, I'm on my phone right now, so this is going to embarrass me if I attempt. I can see some of it. You know what? Actually, what I'm going to do is see if I can capture this.
Yeah, because it's really interesting what you said. Almost rings along these lines. Like I said, I've been contemplating this darn passage, trying to figure out what the hell it means.
But wouldn't all this just happen with entanglement? Because we found that, you know, if you've got two entangled particles, one here on Earth, the other one at the other far end of the universe, you spin this one on Earth, then the one on the other far end of the universe automatically spins as well because they're in direct communication.
Yeah.
And if we're entangled with everything in the universe, by our intent of looking at that, we're affecting that wherever that is in the universe at the same time because everything's entangled. It's the same. It's the same with remote prayer and remote healing. We know that works.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with people that aren't physically anywhere, you know, they're thousands of miles away from people that are ill, but the mere act of just thinking about them and wanting them to be better, their cancer and stuff improves. That's been recorded in medical texts.
Oh yeah, I mean it makes perfect sense. No, can you get that, Fabian?
Yes, I'm trying to read it now. I think I'm doing this. I probably need glasses.
I can read it if you want.
If you don't mind.
Okay,
and
sure.
right before you read it, Daz, what you're saying about quantum entanglement, I've done some research on that as well. And you know, what we're discussing right now might just be all just different characteristics of how all this works together, looking at small pictures and pieces of the big picture. So it's like quantum computing, instant transfer of data over space. So ultimately, that's what it comes down to. So quantum physics and quantum computing could be the way the information goes so quickly. Because at this point, if you were to remote view something in another star system, then you're talking about faster than light speeds and stuff like that. But that's suddenly distance doesn't make a difference when you have entangled particles.
Yeah.
So that can be just how the operating system works. And so I guess what we're discussing is kind of what is the operating system itself, if any of this works at all, what we're talking about. And so I'm gonna, Russell, if you want to read this, I can make out the words that they have in all caps.
No, I'll go ahead and read it because literally, like, when you said that, I was like, that's interesting. And this language sounds similar. I don't know your topic, so maybe this will make sense to you. Okay, so he's talking to Axelrod, whoever it was that, okay, you're familiar with the book?
Yes, I've read it.
Okay, so Ingo says, well, when they saw me, they couldn't really see me, could they? What then were they seeing? I'm asking myself this, Axel. So then Axel says, yes, go on. So it's more like they were feeling rather than seeing or picking up on mind vibes. It's more like it was, yes, sort of a dimensional thing, rather sort of like a ripple in some kind of cross-dimensionality. Yes, that's it. They felt something, not particularly me, but something. Then he paused and he said, and they knew what that ripple meant, like a sort of penetration of where they were. So then Axelrod says, then why did you say, wow? So Ingo says, well, if I can articulate it, it was like there is a sort of cross-dimensional, well, if you can imagine that you feel a presence but can't see it, it was something like that. Only those guys, they were going to hone in on it. At least that's the best way to describe it. So Axelrod says, so you are referring to telepathy plus something else. So if they had a generic detection field and something set off a bell, like, you know, let's say, I don't know how internet security works, but let's say someone's sitting in a room and someone's gonna try to hack their system or get through the firewall, there's gonna be notice, and then you could type and then hone in on, and then find that person's ISP. So I don't know if that at all rings true to the concept you were saying, but
That
yours.
is, yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Everything that you've just described. Now, if there was internet security, if there was internet, there wasn't even internet when I was a kid. So if there was internet with Ingo Swann, he probably would have described this differently. He probably would have had a sense to say, oh, they detected me on their network. And now I remember when I read it, I remember him hiding or trying to hide his identity when he was spotted. And so what that reminds me of, do you remember, I think it was 10, 15 or so years ago when that English guy hacked into NASA to get pictures? Yes, now I think what he did is very similar to what Ingo was trying to explain, where he had hacked into NASA. He was downloading these high resolution pictures, and somebody at NASA happened to see what he was doing on the computer, and so they typed back to him, oh, what are you doing? Who is this? So I get the sense that that's kind of like what we're discussing. And of course, all this is theoretical, but I think it creates a framework that's much easier to understand and say, is this possibly how remote viewing works? Just logging into something. And the other thing it reminds me of is people that describe what they call the Akashic record or the Akashic library, which is something that people have been tapping into in biblical texts and so on for thousands of years, if you've ever had a chance to look into what that is. So my thought has always been, is it possible that when people remote view, if they're just looking at data, not actual aliens themselves, but somehow data that was captured in space itself, in space and time, if it was just recorded that way, and we now call this the Akashic record, is it possible that this is the same database that we're talking about? It's all just a big database of information that you can interact with if you can log into it.
So I'd like to throw my 2 cents into that. So Dean Radin has done a lot of experiments. I think he's part of IONS. And I think one of the experiments that he did was the observer experiment, which I think we've all experienced when we look for no reason and someone's staring at us and we can sense that someone's staring at us. We turn around and we look at the car on the highway and we notice that that person is looking at us, or we might be looking at someone and when you look at them, they automatically look back. And I sometimes think that when you're in that alpha or maybe beta state of mind, what Dean found was looking at the brain waves and the biometrics of the individual that is in a shielded room. When somebody is thinking about that person or focused on that person, their vitals change. Hypothetically, if you're talking about aliens, if they sense that and they might be more in tune to it because of their way of being, I think that I don't see why they couldn't then, in a sense, remote view the origin of that sensation to get to the source. That's just hypothetical.
Just to add to that, it does suggest that the subconscious is aware of being remote viewed when the conscious isn't. The same place we get the RV data from knows what's going on, but it's not necessarily going to tell us. And just to add one more thing to that, the TDS training videos that are up on YouTube, the last one of those is about remote healing. And in it, Brew Calabrese is saying, sometimes you're doing these sessions and you go to do your healing and you'll just hear a voice say, stop, and then you stop. And, it's anyone's guess whether that is the subconscious of the individual saying you shouldn't do this or aliens. I don't know. But that would happen. You as the viewer would be aware that there was pushback from that other human being to say stop. So maybe it can happen, but it's harder for us to be aware of it consciously.
It's all interesting thoughts. I guess what might be happening is based upon all our different belief structures as well. Maybe our different belief structures is making what's happening around us. And the more set you are in your belief structure, the more, maybe because I don't believe that remote viewers go to target sites, that sets my reality within what happens with me with remote viewing. It might not be the case for everyone. Someone that believes it to be so might have a complete different mechanism for around them, because we do know that intent does play a major part in this, and whatever we look at does we do affect things with thinking about things and with our mind. Very interesting.
One of the things on that, Daz, that I 100% agree with you is, for a really long time since I began learning remote viewing, I was always told that you can't remote view numbers. The numbers are just too, if you do it, it's just too damn difficult. And you shouldn't even try. It's been tried and you shouldn't do it. And I believed that for a really long time. And about a year ago, I decided to really put that idea to the test. And what I found is that's a whole bunch of nonsense, that actually it's very possible to do that. And I'm by no means have unlocked that key, I think, fully, but it's definitely something that I've been spending a lot of time on doing. And it's definitely possible, but it started with addressing the belief first, which was interesting. I had to address the belief that this is actually what could happen. And I had to get to the kind of the root of that, bring that to the surface, handle what that belief was, decide to change it, and not go into agreement with that anymore. Then suddenly I actually started seeing results in my remote viewing session that were positive over time. And so I believe that actually just your belief structure in general affects how good of a remote viewer you can be. Not that you can't do it if you don't believe it's not possible, because I've seen that firsthand. People can do it who think it's not real and they still do it. But I think if you tackle the belief structure you have about what's possible and then work with remote viewing, it's like you're uncapping your potential at that point, I think. So maybe that's the case. I don't know for sure. It's just a one-off, but it's definitely been something I've been very interested and keen in looking into. So
actually, Brett, you just reminded me of something that I was very excited about, that I had a lot of success with. And that's when you talk about belief and changing what people are hearing they can do with remote viewing. One of the things I did with my group, I wanted to task them, if the purpose of this experiment is to, I wanted to see if they could tell the difference between an imaginary target and a real target. So obvious, real, simple, no mystery targets, just kind of a simple thing like a phone, a statue, something like that. So I'd give them real examples as well as completely imagined targets. And I wanted to see if their approach to remote viewing could be affected. So I asked them, as they were going through working with their ideograms and saying, okay, well, it feels soft, it's smooth, it's circular, that kind of thing. I said, why don't you add in an additional qualifier that says, let me know if you think it seems imaginary, virtual, or real. And what I found, I was very impressed by the number of viewers who got back to me saying, when I touched the ideogram, I felt like this target was virtual. And so I had multiple targets. Some of them I created on the computer with just basic imaging software. And so I called those the virtual targets. And then there were the physical, real targets. And then there were the targets that I did not write down. I just made them up in my mind. And I assigned what I was thinking to just a target identifier. And I found that the group was very good with being able to differentiate between the different targets. There were a few guys, I created this floating castle, and they said, well, I feel like there is this floating rectangular shape. It seems three-dimensional, but the fact that it's floating and the way it's moving makes me think that it's virtual. And so a lot of them nailed that. And then my imaginary targets, they said, well, this doesn't seem like a physical thing, and it doesn't seem like it's on a computer, so it seems like it could be imaginary. And so right there, I was very excited to see that additional qualifiers can be added to their techniques. So belief does play a big part on it, I think.
Yeah, definitely, possibly. I think I'd definitely be interested. What's the data set? How big is your sample size?
my sample size, the people that were working with me, or the actual pieces I was giving them?
The total, I'm curious, like how many sessions you've had total where you task that, and then the accuracy overall of the sample size.
It was not a very good sample size. I really should have continued it. I did it, I think I only did 2 or 3 experiments with that. The 2 or 3 that I did were worked on by, I'd say, about 5 viewers each. And so not as large of a sample size as would be good. I think if other people were to continue with those same ideas to bring it more validity, that'd be nice. I didn't have quite enough people in my group at the time that were willing to consistently remote view. So I only did, yeah, everybody's got their jobs and all that stuff. I think right now with COVID-19, a lot more people have time for this kind of stuff. But at the time I was doing these experiments, I only had, I'd say, 3 or 4 viewers that were really dedicated to what they were doing. And they happened to be pretty accurate with what I was showing them. But yeah, not a big enough sample size, I'd say.
Okay.
I think, sorry, Daz.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead if you want to say something.
Just a quick one. I think from what Ingo was describing there, it reminds me how some people view a spiritual entity like what we often call a ghost, where we don't see the full, we see like a misty person, or you call them shadow people, or we don't see the full person. And you could consider that spirits, if they do indeed exist, are also interdimensional. And another point on that, rather than the sort of the alert system within the firewall, quite a few viewers often speak about that the entity that sees them looks at them directly. So it would suggest to me, if this is happening, that the entity is able to visibly see something. Like we're viewing, if we're viewing from a distance, but the spirit, the entity on a remote view, like the alien entity, can actually see the viewer almost as though they can locate them wherever they are. That's just my thoughts. And just one other thing is there's also, in relation to the skull experiment, for example, where they were doing seances in a room and there was table tapping and everything, it made me also think, there was another group, I can't remember all the details, but they set up a group of people, and what they were trying to do was to make contact, to contact the spirit, try and get some table rapping going. Nothing happened. The organizer of that project decided that we will create an entity, then we will make up a spirit between the group. We will give that spirit an identity, a name, an address, where he lived in the past, what time period he lived in. Once they'd done that, they then decided to conduct this. It was over about 12 months. They had no results whatsoever, but they decided to conduct their experiment in a darkened room. Once they actually did that in the darkened room, they started getting responses, table rappings, and all sorts of things. But the spirit, the alleged spirit that they contacted, took on the identity of the person that the group had created. So even when they asked questions, in other words, how old are you? Let's just say he was 25. They would witness, it was a controlled experiment, they would witness 25 raps. Then they would say, for example, say if the person lived in, I don't know, say Canada, they would say, where did you live? And they give him the option, and he would rap positively for Canada. So it's just interacting with a few of those things that we're talking about, the spiritual connection, and also the manipulation of are we manipulating some of these results ourselves with our minds? Sorry if that was a bit long-winded, but I just thought I'd just point that one in. Thanks, Daz.
It's a very interesting concept. Do you know what that's called when you create a spirit like that? It's an old Tibetan
Tulpa.
approach. Tulpa, I think, is what they call it. When you create a spirit and just kind of excise it from yourself.
In a document recently, I've been looking at from Ingo's archives. I think he wrote in about 94, 96 or something. He was talking about some stages that he'd been working on that he thought were more advanced than CRV, and one of those stages that he was working on was where he was actually starting to physically manifest some kind of life form like that, some kind of fault form life form that he was working on.
I like that right now it seems like we're stumbling onto things that people did thousands of years ago, is what the concept that you just shared with the regarding what was called the tulpa. That's ancient Tibetan technique. And then of course you look at remote viewing. Now, of course, now we use paper and pen and everything, but then there are ancient civilizations that would claim that it came from them had they been here to discuss this with us.
Yeah.
Occultists still do this stuff today. Another word for the tulpa is egregore or egregory. There's a cute little book on Amazon called Egregories, the occult entities that watch over us. And there's the idea in that any group of people, you don't have to deliberately set out to create a spirit. Just lots of people all thinking the same thing, putting their feelings to it, like they start worshipping a god that somebody tells them exists, and in some way that does exist then.
I mean, it's the same with like distant healing, because I was reading a book, rereading it again, there's a book called The Field by Lynn McTaggart, absolutely fantastic book, and there's a section in there about distant healing, and distant healing that was done under scientific test in hospitals and stuff. And they were using cancer patients, and they had a set amount, I think it was like 20 or 30 distant healers, but just by them focusing their attention on a person's name on an envelope, they all managed over a period of time to dramatically decrease the effects the cancer was having on patients. Which is, when you're thinking about it, that is just absolutely amazing that we can do that kind of stuff.
Russell Targ's daughter did a lot of that experiment, and it was double blind. And also Larry Dossi was, I remember him speaking about that in the early 90s too. And they had different types of faith healers. They had shamans, they had Tibetan monks. It was double blind. It was in a hospital setting. The people that were being prayed for didn't know that they were being prayed for, and the people doing the praying had no idea who they were praying for. But yet there was a significant effect. It was impressive. That was a very impressive study.
Absolutely amazing, yeah. So it just goes to show, whatever we do every day, we're affecting affecting the universe around us with what we're thinking and doing. So it's probably the same with remote viewing to some degree.
Daz, one quick question. Did you also experience these kind of effects when looking into the past? Not only ET targets, but past targets when someone observes you and notices you?
I've only ever had that happen to me twice in remote viewing. One of them was an ET target, so I could understand that they might be able to pick up on whatever kind of, I don't know, interference we're causing. And the other one was an esoteric target, but it was actually, again, I can't feedback on it whether it was real or not. But it was actually the target was a live black magic ritual that Aleister Crowley was doing. And Aleister Crowley was like, really into black magic and rituals, all this kind of stuff. Very famous guy. And I felt that when I was looking at them doing some kind of ritual, everyone in the room looked up and knew I was there looking at them. But again, I can't, it's only anecdotal. I can't actually properly validate that. But that's the only two times it's ever happened to me that I feel, maybe, no, yeah, I think that's the only two times. I mean, I've had conversations with life forms at targets, but I don't know if that's just me accessing their mental thoughts and their energy patterns and just having a conversation rather than a proper real life two-way conversation.
Well, in my opinion, if I may, I believe Brett said something earlier about the emotion when he tapped into a feeling that the thing started, and I think it's about intention plus emotion in order to get something. I don't know, the presence, to feel your presence or to heal or whatever.
Would make sense.
Possibly. I mean, that is where the data came through, was when I got to, trying to access the emotion, the EI for the life form. And that's when it came through. So it was interesting.
Hey, Daz.
Yep.
With you know how you said that you were having problems with remote viewing from time to time because of an injury, and Jill mentions the same thing. This is, I guess, for a few guys. If that happens, do you then reset your remote viewing skills? Do you like, if you're doing a project with, say, 5 other people, do you go back and find those people and they say, oh, I've had an accident or something's occurred? Do you say to them to reset their abilities or reset their training, or how do you retouch? How do you reconnect back to those skill sets again?
Well, what I'm going through is a more recent thing. I've been ill now since November, and it's just chronic pain I have. So it's like 5 or 6 days a week. I'm in constant pain. So I'm just trying to train myself to, when I'm doing the RV, to ignore it. Because it's almost like having a headache or a toothache continuously. So I'm just having to retrain myself to try to ignore it as much as possible, because I don't think it's going anywhere for the foreseeable future. So yeah, it's just a case of and it's hard. I'm finding it hard, because sometimes you can't sit comfortably and do the remote viewing session when you want to. But it's a case of just trying to put it to the back of your mind, and because what I do is a job, and if I don't do it, then I don't get paid, and if I don't get paid, then I'll be out on the street. So I have to learn to put it to one side, and that's what I'm doing. Is just teaching myself to put it aside into a box until the hour and a half is up, and yeah, that's all I can do with it, really.
Do you categorize people who are doing this as being 50%, I guess, at their best, or is there a drop off like 20%, 30% on your ability to tune in?
I don't know, actually. I haven't seen any drop over the last few months. I'm still hitting targets every week, every month. So I haven't seen I haven't seen a drop off in accuracy. I haven't seen any problems, but I guess if the pain got really bad, I guess, well, I just wouldn't do it on that day. If you had to do a remote viewing session and it's like, any distractors like feeding hunger or anything, just don't do it. Pick another day. But I haven't reached that stage yet. But yeah, no, I definitely haven't seen any negative results over the last 9 months.
In your work with Ingo towards the end of his life, did he have the same thing? Because he had chronic pain as well.
I know he was very, very ill, and he was very ill when I went to see him. And he was getting on a bit as well, and he was very depressed, and he'd been depressed for a long time, because some of his comments were like, I've had enough, I can't wait to die kind of comments. I have a feeling that for quite a few years he'd had either some medical problems or he was lonely. I think he might have had some money problems as well along the lines. So yeah, it's like he's obviously a person that we hold upon high, but at the same point, he's like every one of us. We all have, we're all getting older. We all get aches and pains. We all got to pay the rent and all this kind of stuff. We all get a bit depressed and a bit lonely. That's why it's good that we're all having this kind of thing, because at the moment we can't go out and speak to other people very much. But But because Ingo was an older type of guy as well, and he didn't like technology in any way at all, he missed out on the kind of things that we can do now with this great technology and Zoom and everything. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, when I first started, or when some of us first started in remote viewing, the only way you could talk to people was for a 56K modem at 4K a second through email internet groups. If you wanted to share an image, you had to wait 20 minutes for the image to come down. Look at what we're doing now, where we can share videos online. 40, how many people in this room? 43 people in this room, all communicating. It's fantastic. But Ingo, he was a bit sad in his latter part of his life. Yeah, I think he was in pain getting out, and I guess we'll all get there.
Just on that note, when I first really started discovering RV and playing with it there, and perhaps irresponsibly, I was asked to look at a particular target, but to actually get the information across from Australia to the UK, it had to go through about four people via several fax machines before it actually got to the end person. It's as you say, Daz, things have come on massively. It's leaps and bounds.
The problem that you guys have if you're remote viewing too much is you're running out of hyper infinity. According to Tim Riffat, you guys are all running out of hyper infinity, and Tim Riffat's machines will replace that hyper infinity, because when you remote view, your hyper infinity goes out. Do you guys know that?
Oh, cool. How much does it cost?
Is that for 4 easy payments of $9.99 or $99.99?
Because everybody who does remote viewing gets possessed. And so the only person who can teach you how to remote view safely is Tim Riffat. And thankfully, he's been doing this for decades.
How do you run out of infinity?
It goes out, man. It just goes out. The hyper infinity goes out. It's here. Let me show you. I can if I can get a document up here, you can see the proof from Tim's page. Right here. As you remotely view, remote influence, your energy bodies light up like a firefly as hyperinfinity is transferred out of your biophysical body that drifts off and leaves your physical body vulnerable to possession. Hyperinfinity is the force of free will that keeps your body from being possessed while sleeping, as it resides normally in your skeleton. Hence, bone generators, rights reserved, the exclusive trademark property of Tim Riffat. When you go remote viewing and remote influencing, your free will, hyperinfinity flows into your biophysical body and then drifts off to the remote viewing. That sounds as good to me as like any explanation I've ever heard.
I mean, maybe if you believe that hard enough. It's funny how many different people have kind of taken remote viewing and called whatever it is that they're doing remote viewing.
He's been around for years.
So many different. Has he really? I'd never heard of him before.
Yeah. I think he's an English guy. He's from the UK. I'm ashamed to say. And I actually own his books. I own. I think it's remote viewing for project managers or something like that. Yeah.
I've heard of another guy who also claims he was taught by some like Western European remote viewing group who, I mean, he's like a big religious guy, it seemed. I listened to him once on the radio. I think he was with one of those, the Bluebird guy. I forget what that guy's name is, but he was talking about remote viewing and like remote influencing. And I was like, what? Like, okay, this sounds nothing like any method I've heard of, but hey, you do you. So, but I mean, it's kind of, people take the name and just say what they're doing is remote viewing these days. But actually this is a interesting topic though, not necessarily riff it, but just the idea of like, what is remote viewing? And cause it's obviously been a thing where people say, well, this is remote viewing or that is remote viewing, and how it's like,
it's not CE5
you use. No, it's
I
not.
certainly wouldn't call this proof.
I mean, depending who you ask, right? But I'm referring more to the which definition you use, whether it's because remote viewing, the name, I mean, if you asked Ingo, I'm pretty sure, I mean, that's just maybe a little controversial, but Ingo would say, well, it's the experiment. Remote view, he wrote about this. He's like, it's an experiment. It's a scientific experiment. Don't use it against things that don't have feedback, because otherwise you're tainting the good name of remote viewing in science, and he really wanted to be accepted in science. Whereas nowadays, now obviously that's not the case. It's kind of evolved for better or for worse, right? But it's, I don't know, it's interesting how far it's kind of been absconded and gone off, like, you know, it's like something that has nothing to do with remote viewing, some like Hindu prayer to something that is CE5. And it's like, I've had, well, that's neither here nor there, I won't go into that, but you know, it's like, it depends on who you talk. Oh yeah, I'm a remote viewer. See, it's accredited because the Stanford Research Institute did research on it. So now suddenly I'm on a pedestal. So I don't know, you always got to do your homework, right, on things, do your due diligence.
I got a serious question about the hyper infinity, and it running out, right? Overtraining. I think I've had times when I've been viewing a lot and then I've suddenly just missed everything and had to just take a big break and felt, is that just because I believe that would happen because I read somewhere, or is that a thing that other people experience?
I think there's overtraining, don't you think, or over viewing, don't you think, Daz? That's a real phenomenon. You run too much.
It's in the definitions of the CRV manual. They literally describe the phenomena of overtraining. I was going to ask Rick, what were you going to say?
I was just referring back to this hyper infinity. I wouldn't call it proof. It's just somebody's writings there. There's no backup at all. And as for the standing of the Rifat name, yeah, I find it questionable as well.
Yeah, when, you know, it's this being an admin for that remote viewing group of Alexis's has been a journey into the bizarre. You know, a lot of the posts that don't make it in, you know, people are like, well, you know, we got an invisible fence for our dog, and our dog has a rhinestone collar, and he ran into the invisible fence, and a beam focused out of the rhinestone collar and hit me in the third eye. Is that remote viewing? I'm just like, oh my God. And then you delete a post or ban somebody, then they're like, I'm going to remotely attack you and stop your heart. I mean, it's just bizarre what people are coming in.
I've gotten some of that. Some interesting emails where people are saying, I've been visiting you, Brett. Have you been noticing it? And I was like,
right, I know. And people are like, are you remote viewing me? It's like, yes, I remote viewed you and your mind looked like a can of alphabet soup. Okay. It just didn't make any sense to me and I'm not interested. I mean, it's just bizarre why in the heck, when I can miss a 40-story building in a Target, would I try to, you know, remote view your thoughts? But anyway, don't get me. What's that? I didn't hear you, Rick.
No, that's all right. Interference.
Oh, okay. All right.
I just never want to be remote viewed while I'm like in the shower. I think that'd be rude.
Well, Fabian,
you know, I was going to
I am
ask
now
Fabian,
right
put on a
now
little
going
show,
to
mate.
put that.
That's all you need to do.
It's now
Put
going into
on
my
a show.
blind pool, Fabian. It's going to get random chances going to make it pop out of my blind pool probably tomorrow.
Yeah,
so I hope you're ready for that now.
I did that one to myself.
I was going to ask you about those pink shower flip-flops you wear. What's the deal with that?
I know, it's the strategically placed foam which I find more interesting.
I was a big fan of the Powerpuff Girls. Xena Warrior Princess. That was a huge one for me. I've got Xena Warrior Princess everything. Towels, bed sheets.
True fan. Fabian.
But the question is, did you guys know that?
We'll have 400 viewers tomorrow.
It would be funny if every time you remote viewed, there was a little counter that goes up like on YouTube.
I know if Fabian's putting on a shower show, though, I mean, the viewings may sort of go absolutely out of this world.
All right. Okay. So now this tells me that if I sense that I'm being remote viewed, I did that one to myself. So that's scary. But if I do sense that I'm being remote viewed, like if I feel like there are eyes on me, I'm going to ask you guys next time we do one of these meetings, and that can be feedback of some sort, maybe. I kind of want to stop with this joke now.
It's interesting because this what happened in the military unit, right? When they were talking about, I mean, I forget who, it may have been Ed who gave the story. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But he said something that like, or maybe it was somebody else, but there was someone in the unit I heard, don't quote me on it, where some general said this is something that man should not be able to do because he was super religious. Is that was that in Paul's book? I feel like I heard that somewhere and I could be totally off. But so maybe someone else has read or heard that from someone who was in the group.
It was in Ed's book, Tell Me What You See.
Is that where it's from? Okay, I feel like I heard that. But it's an interesting thing because really, if the idea that all information is available is that it kind of is going to, people that have things to fear being found out are going to be freaked out by that. And it may just be using, you know, taking a shower, you know, as I don't want people to know. And suddenly you're tapping on their greatest, darkest fears or insecurities rather is really what it is. They're uncomfortable with the idea. And so they're going to be really anti and or against it. Right. And so, I mean, that's probably one of the hurdles of RV ever becoming a mainstream kind of approach, is a way to bridge that gap. Say, listen, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is actually work we're doing here, and we could care less about what you're doing in the bathroom. And no, like, I mean, that's just like almost the ridiculous one, right? But then there's other things too. It's like there are a lot of people who live their lives with things to fear, right? Things that beliefs, mindsets, whatever, that they don't want people to know about. If that information is just available, that freaks them out. And so they don't want it to be real, and they want to make sure no one makes sure it's real and all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting divide there.
Well, in Ingo's autobiography,
one day maybe.
I'm sorry, Brett.
No, go ahead.
No, we got a time lag, so it's hard for me to tell. Sorry. Are you done? In Ingo's autobiography, he tells the story of the CIA agents being terrified to eat lunch around him.
Well,
right. I remember
a lot of people have got secrets, haven't they? You know, even if it's, you know, it's their sexual practices or whatever. Everyone's got something that they don't want anyone else to know about them. And you know, it's accessible. You know, like I did the project not long ago where I tasked people with a target that only existed in my head, and all 10 remote viewers all managed to get that target. So it's provable that, you know, you can just access vaults. So
almost gives credence to the 10 Commandments, doesn't it? Thou shalt not do this, that, and the other.
View your neighbor in the shower.
Yeah.
It's the 11th commandment.
There is, I think, a saving grace in that remote viewing results should be taken with a grain of salt. I think that's a good approach, because then, like, if you don't ever want to put all of your faith in remote viewing, I think it's a good guiding light to get people started looking in the right direction with situations like missing person cases. But I would worry if ever there were enough remote viewers claiming to be 100% accurate 100% of the time, because I think there's a safety in knowing that when you're remote viewing, when you've been tasked to remote view, say, a couch, that you might see a chair of some sort, that it's not 100% right. Because as soon as it crosses over into that 100% right situation, you have legal and scary situations. And it makes me think of the American laws on spectral viewing that were written after the Salem witchcraft trials. You don't want to be able to convict somebody based on spectral evidence. And so it's good that the science is it has a certain amount of error margin built in. I think that's a safety for everyone involved.
I guess an interesting question would be to know what it feels like to be remote viewed. Is there any points about that? And second question would be, I think I've read somewhere, but I can't remember where, that the Russians were working on ways to protect places and people from being remote viewed. But I can't remember. I don't know if any of you know something about this.
Lynn Buchanan professes that he's figured out how to make something non-viewable in my own personal experience, I've never run into anything that was not viewable. That's just my own personal experience, though.
I've read some about that.
Comment.
I've heard some about that as well. And also, I would think, what if there is a way of falsifying what you're viewing? If you can change your perception on things, because remote viewing seems to be possible of viewing someone's imagination, who's to say that somebody didn't rig a target? Like, say, if you targets that do not have any kind of feedback available right off, who's to say that somebody's perception of that target hasn't influenced the results that a remote viewer would see?
Yeah,
It's a very valid question, in my opinion.
I mean, in a sense, you're talking about intentional telepathic overlay.
Yes.
Cedric, what was the last part of your question?
The last part was about, I vaguely remember the Russians, or reading about the Russians working on a system that would protect places or people from being remote viewed. And I think Fabian and Brett just confirmed that they read about it somewhere. And the first part of the question was if we know what it feels like to be remote viewed. I mean, is it physical? Is it something in your head? Is it voices, or is it just the feeling of a presence? Or I don't know. I've never read about people saying that they carried out experiments where they were remote viewed and could list, I mean, physical effects of what it feels like to be remote viewed by someone else.
Do you have Lynn Buchanan's book, The Seventh Sense?
No, I don't.
Okay, if you ever get that, chapter 10 is called Protection. And he goes into a lot of the very good answers, actually, for the questions you're asking. So if you get a hold of that, there's one note where he mentioned the Chinese remote viewing facilities. They would place them next to something, and I'm paraphrasing, I may not remember it exactly, but something like an amusement park, some very high entropy thing near their facility, so that an average viewer might be drawn to the amusement park instead of going. Now, the one thing I found absolutely hilarious, and when you read it, he talked about people that use white light around themselves for protection. He said he loved it because it would turn an 1.5-hour session into a 10-minute session. Because what had happened, by believing this white light was protecting them, they let down their real-time awareness. They're like, oh, okay, I'm protected. So they let their mind go off somewhere else. And he literally said when they found somebody surrounding themselves with white light for protection, it would save them time and they could take an early lunch.
Actually, to your point too, Russell, to validate kind of what the Chinese were doing, if you think back when I think they were at SRI in the initial stages of the remote viewing, they were given a target that was in Virginia. I think it was a lake, but that was a boring sight. And both Ingo Swann and the other, I forget, how can I forget the other remote viewer?
Pat Price.
Thank you, Pat. They went to the listening post, which really just, it had a lot more energy, and it was just more psychically sexy. So they didn't even bother with the lake. They just went right to the listening post.
Yeah. Actually, since I have a witness to this story, which I rarely do, Brett, would you mind if I told a story that involved us at IRVA?
I don't remember which story it is, but I'm
the woman that honed in on us.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
here's
if you'd like to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could tell a story and nobody would believe me, but you're a witness and people trust you. So there we go.
It's an interesting woman.
So someone had asked Paul a question. He was up on stage. Do you know anything about, Ingo and Scientology? So then Paul said, no, I don't, but there's one of my students that you could talk to after this is over. So as soon as that was over, Brett and I were sitting next to each other. This woman just literally like, bam, just came, started talking, telling us all this stuff. And, I kept getting this feeling and I could feel her. Now, I'm not saying this, she wasn't doing a formal session or whatever, but I could literally feel her trying to probe and ping me strongly. So I left, Brett stayed there with her, went down to the little computer room, took her name, Googled it. And when her bio came up, she had worked for every frigging intelligence service on the entire planet.
Her LinkedIn was like a list of like
It was like
every defense agency.
And substantial credentials period of time. So I came back and Brett was standing there with her. And I said, well, that, it's really interesting about you just kind of pinging me. And she's like, what are you talking about? And then Brett goes, oh, well, we were just talking about that. And, and I said, but every time I try to ping you, it just kind of deflects. Why is that? Then she said something, and then I held that sheet up. You remember that, Brett?
Yeah, you held up her LinkedIn profile.
I held up her LinkedIn.
So funny.
Brett's face kind of turned white. So I was like, so why don't you tell me about your background and why you're so interested in this? And then she kind of got quiet, and we all went apart. Next day, we come into the Irva Auditorium. She's sitting there, and she goes, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm like, yeah. She goes, I have this dream about you, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And I'm like, okay. So then we go out to the chairs out in the lobby, and she accurately described an event in great detail that happened to me when I was 4 years old. And it's like nobody would have known this event. And so she said, what I'd like to do is reach inside your energy body and heal you of the trauma of that. And I said, absolutely not. Keep your little etheric hands out of my energy body. Thank you for pointing out what it is you're aware of. I'll take care of it myself. And then she disappeared, never saw her again.
It was really bizarre. I mean, it's a very strange story at Irva, which it was very bizarre because the thing she was talking about, she was very interested in creating like a dictionary of different psychic types of perceptions. And so she was like asking me a lot of questions about like my own experience, how I worked, and like, can you define that? Can you describe that in detail? And then, but what she was really talking about, and she wasn't talking a lot about it, but like I was able to get some information out, is she was interested more in translating what RVers can do over to AI doing it. And so she was basically talking about how she's been on the boards of all these things, without going into detail of it, of how they're getting AI to be able to remote view more accurately than people, down to the degree of they can actually take, and they have a really weird, she was talking about like DNA and like some really weird experiments they were doing as far as like take the DNA of a person as like a target prompt, and then the AI will spit out their whole life story for you, essentially.
Yep.
Of what they'll do. And so it all seemed very like, I didn't have any background before, so I was like, it's very interesting. Sure, maybe like hypothetically, right? But yeah, then when Russell came back with their LinkedIn profile, I was just
not quite okay. Not quite hypothetically, because about homeopathy. In homeopathy, in remedy, in homeopathy, there is no substance. That I don't know. So it's like a hologram of a substance. Could be the same thing.
I say from my perspective only, hypothetically. That's all.
Okay. Excuse me.
I'm not aware of it. Yeah. I mean, for all I know, it's like there's a real working thing going on.
In Oana, no, I understand what you're talking about, homeopathy, and I see the analogy too. What Brett's saying, the gal elaborated on, but the weirdest thing, and I will tell you, I literally could feel her trying to probe. But whenever I tried to inquire of her, it was like she was so professional, it was like it just skipped off her. And then Brett and her were having a conversation. But one of her things, and this was another thing that was interesting, she knew my profession, but I had not told her my profession. So she goes, well, it's just like the clearing practice you do. And I was like, that's so weird, because I didn't mention I do that. Then she said, we can scan a person's like mental space, find the traumas, including, past life or whatever you want to call them, traumas, and help them locate them and heal them with AI. And you remember, I can't remember, because she was also
it was very weird.
She was she had one of those little stands in the hallway. She wasn't a prime speaker. And what was the name of her program? It was a biblical name, like Isaiah, or the AI program she was advertising on her little hallway.
I don't remember the specific.
Yeah, it was just, it was like a biblical name. But no, I just thought I would answer, what's it like to be pinged by someone? And since Brad was here, I took advantage of having a witness, but it was definitely weird.
Russell, you didn't keep hold of that LinkedIn sheet that you were able to print off?
I still have it.
You still have it? Okay, so you could. I don't know whether you can see that. Did anyone else see that tall guy, in the black suit, Mark D. Hilbert, who he sort of came in a little bit like a Man in Black sort of thing?
Oh, was he the African-American gentleman?
Yeah. He was.
Yeah, and he was wearing that like $3,000 suit with running shoes. Remember that? It
was a bit odd, wasn't it?
He had like a $3,000 suit, and those. In fact, I still have his card too. And he had white tennis shoes. He was so.
His card? That's funny.
Yeah, he was so precise and so crisp and so articulate and so focused. And he came right up to me too. And he said, "Hey, I'd like to, give you my card." And I was like, "Oh, for what?" And he goes, "Well, just get a hold of me sometime and you'll find out." And then he walked off.
Yeah. John Alexander was saying
some weird characters at IRVA. Let me tell you, interesting folks.
Yeah, but that guy, I'm telling you, that guy was. I don't know how to put his presence, but he was sharp. He was a clear-headed dude.
He was a little intimidating as well there.
His presence
maybe it's
was
because I'm a short ass hobbit, but yeah.
No, his presence was intense, but I couldn't take I couldn't take my eyes off the damn running shoes with a $3,000 suit.
Just going back to the finding traumas and healing them things, I think is one of Ed Reardon's sessions, is QAnon one maybe, where he's talking about some AI in space that's gonna. It might not be that, but I've seen somebody's session on video about this AI space thing that can heal everybody's problems, and there's some secret group somewhere worrying about the ethical implications of this thing. So maybe that's what your mystery lady's into.
No, she was talking about actually government research is what she was alluding to. I mean, because she's on the board of U.S. You'd have to ask Russell, because Russell has her LinkedIn. But
I hadn't even
was on
heard.
the board. She was talking. I'd never heard of it. She was like some civilian individual who was in charge of a lot of different boards of like research in the military and intelligence and stuff like that.
That's a civilian individual then.
I'd never heard of some of the agencies. I'd never heard of some of the agencies till I got back home and looked them up. I mean, it like I said, that resume is just like, whoa, okay.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me that the government's still involved in like poking their head into IRVA. You know what I mean? See what people are doing. I mean, it's where the U.S. government funded the program in the first place. So who knows if they still have something today that, hey, someone's still keeping an eye on what people are doing, what the presenters are doing. So like, I can't really speculate further than that, but
yeah, that makes sense.
It was definitely a strange story.
It's funny because it seems like we're continuing the work that the government was interested in doing in the first place, and they're realizing, oh, well, if we just make this work available to the public, then there will be a bunch of remote viewers that'll keep doing this for free, and they'll post their stuff, and we'll be able to follow their results. So that makes sense. It's a very good investment.
Maybe.
Quick question, guys. I find it hard to believe that the government would not be utilizing remote viewing in some way today. Still, at this point, they have to know what good use it is. They relatively openly, acknowledged it. Is anybody getting tasked specifically by governments, into the private sector as far as for targeting by the government? Or could they possibly have found another way to do this? I find it hard to believe, with all the world-class remote viewers that are, out in the private sector, why they wouldn't utilize.
I'll tell you who's interested. I'll tell you who's interested. In my experience, it's not government; it's private investors are interested. People that want to make money. That's who's interested. And it's like, this is an asymmetrical way of gathering information and data to profit off of. That's who's actually interested. And there's a select group of people who understand it's real and are attempting to use it and use it successfully with groups like Daz And I'm sure, I'm sure he's, and others that are out there that are using it for that. Personally, I think that there may be a group still running, who knows, but it would have to be so black and off like books, because it's such a taboo subject. It's something that if it ever came out that today that a politician decided to agree to funding for psi related stuff, they'd have their head, the public would have their head on a pike, kind of a thing. It's so taboo. And well, maybe less taboo today, but it has been for such a long time. And so I think that's why they personally, and I think Ed May even talked about this when he wrote it up in his, like, what he thought about the report on what, that the CIA hired to have written the air report, I think, or I forget what it is, but it's like just such a nonsense report. And it's like they set out with the pre-conclusion that it didn't work and they didn't care. And so
that was the pair report.
Maybe, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So there could be, but my assumption, and obviously it's just a guess at this point, but I imagine if it exists, it's so not government. It's so far away from the government that it may as well be private sector at that point. Totally off the books. Just an idea, though.
Did you watch Third Eye Spies, Brett?
Yep.
Well, do you remember when Ken Kress flat out said he has it from reliable sources that it's still being used? So he said that.
Really? Interesting.
I've got the quote saved. I can find it. And then right towards the end, Russell Targ, remember, he set up a meeting with somebody and they didn't show, and his explanation for them not showing is because they were still involved in the program.
Interesting.
I'll find that.
Well, I mean, definitely possible. I'm not discounting it at all. It's just, I imagine who knows? Like, I obviously don't know. I've never.
I posted a link to Annie Jacobson interview. Someone posted it in the RV group, but she talks, I think, a little bit about it, and there's a different name that they're using now.
There is also suggestion that the government's maybe using the looking glass device to actually move backward and forward in time, with the suggestion that they can actually make minor and small adjustments. But that's, if they're using a device now rather than remote viewing, that's a whole different story. But that would be a whole different discussion.
I think back in the 70s when a lot of this was taking place, I've heard multiple viewers saying that it was like a knife fight in a phone booth analogy. And today, because of the incidents of the Nimitz, with the UFO encounters that, the Pentagon officially finally released, I think people have to really wake up and realize that the world is not as finite as they may have been thinking all along, and that there's a lot more to what's happening around us. So I think we still unfortunately have a very strict mindsets that that some people carry that are very regimented or religious structured. But I think that wall is starting to crack, because all around us we're starting to see that these events, this ability works. It found the downed Russian bomber, and then God knows how many other things that might still be classified. So yeah, I think today it would be a lot more open, but you still would have some resistance.
You guys touched on a lot of things. I just wrote an article recently where I attempted to simulate the life of a CIA or government remote viewer using artificial intelligence dungeon. And I wanted to see if it could be used as an oracle. And, coincidentally, at the end of that, the system predicted that the remote viewing programs were still going on in the government. So if you're interested in that story, I'll send a link in the chat.
I think I've seen no evidence for a program going, and I've done lots, I've researched this as much as I can, talking to all the people, reading all the available documents, and you got to wonder why all the top scientists and all the top viewers say that they aren't working for anyone. But saying that, if there was a program still going on, it would be in the private sector, just like, and you can see similarities to it in the ufology field. especially with, I don't know if you guys have been following UFOs and much, but there was a release of documents from a conversation with an admiral not long ago where he tried to get access to some crashed UFO data, and he was told that, you know, even he wouldn't have access to it because he just didn't have a top enough level to get
Wilson
access.
files, was it?
Sorry?
I heard that.
Was it the Wilson files?
That's the ones, yeah, yeah. And in there, he details
Yeah,
that, you know, the people that are actually doing all the hardcore research on UFOs and crash UFOs, it isn't a government anymore. It's in the private sector, and it's so far removed under black projects that no one's accountable for it, so they can't, you know, they can't be ridiculed for it. So if there is a remote viewing program, it would be by some kind of company that's related to the government, you know, through shell companies and so on, and it would be done in that way. But I haven't seen any evidence of it. Ed May and all the top people claim there is nothing. So we just have to wait and see, I guess. But yeah, if it is there, it's in the private sector somewhere, and it's not government anymore. You know, they're probably subcontracted and they're being paid for with government money, but it's in
Or
an
signals.
indirect
It's like
way.
a signals group.
Yeah.
It'd probably be like a signals group is what I
Yeah, almost like
imagine.
consultants.
I
You
could be
know,
wrong, totally wrong.
yeah, they'd just be classed as consultants, and it wouldn't be called remote viewing. It would come under some other name. You know, it'd be like, I don't know, information services or something. You know, and they'd just be given reports and data that way. Yeah.
A thing that's just sprung to mind, a conversation I had with Paul O'Connor, which he was completely unaware of, and I could actually be wrong. I don't know, but somewhere along the lines, I seem to remember after the fall of the Berlin Wall that Sony Corporation had actually paid a hell of a lot to obtain KGB remote viewing files. Is anyone else aware of that information?
Yes, I was. And the original owner of the Sony Corporation was very much intrigued by that technology, and they were working on different devices, but I do remember that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's. I wasn't sure whether I just made it up because I'm
No,
quite creative, but you never know.
Sony did lots of research in the 80s and 90s, I think it was, and they validated that there was a phenomenon there. Because I've seen the documents, because I actually did a marketing project for Sony. They did lots of ESP research. They found there was a phenomenon, but what they decided at the end of all their research was they couldn't find a way to monetize it. You know, because they're a company that make physical things, they couldn't find a way to actually make money out of it, so they dropped all their research.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I feel a little validated that someone else at least knows about that, and I hadn't made it up. That's a good thing.
Hey Russ, on Third Eye Spies, I actually don't believe that Pat Price died the way he did. It just sounds too contrived that his ending was so radical and quick. I kind of think that he must have tapped into something that everybody else spotted and went, you got to go black, you got to come, you know, with us on this other path rather than the one you're on.
There's, I don't know how I mean, the thing that's not really talked about in that documentary now, Russell is a historian of what the people in the early RV program, like Pat Price, like how Put Off was for a long time, like Ingo Swann, like they all ascribed to a certain religion. And I believe, maybe it was in the documentary and I'm misremembering, but Russell, you might maybe have more information on this. Wasn't one of the concerns that he was basically giving all of the information to the Church of Scientology? And so that's like, if you want motive of why they'd stop, you know, something is because of that.
Yeah,
I don't know,
I mean,
Russell, what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, oh boy, it's a complex thing. I agree with you, Mike, but one of the indicators for me that seemed very odd about Third Eye Spies, it's almost like Russell Targ had some kind of grief or guilt or something that he needed to purge throughout that entire film, including visiting Pat's unmarked grave. It was like he had some kind of regret or something. I don't know what it was. Was it something he found out later? it seems strange that Pat moved from from being at SRI to just under strict relationship with CIA. And then it was also interesting to hear in Third Eye Spies, it was either Hal and Russell that said they saw Pat's body at the Scientology funeral at the Celebrity Center there in LA. So as far as the reporting to Scientology, there's some misnomers on that. Yeah, that did in fact happen. There's actually a guy on the internet with a website, he with some good videos, but he was Pat Price's roommate at the time. He's now an ex-Scientologist, but he still wants to keep some of that modality of clearing going. So he said, you know, Pat reported all the time. And Daz can confirm this, even though I can't go into the source. I've seen some letters back and forth between the remote viewers and L. Ron Hubbard, but they weren't being done stealthily. I mean, the envelopes were just, you know, Menlo Park, Ingo Swann. It wasn't like there was some secret plot.
Russell, didn't Pat Price's body disappear as well for like an hour or something? His corpse?
Well, naturally, yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. His body disappeared by reports, but then Hal, who I consider reliable, I think it was Hal. I can't, don't quote me, but in Third Eye Spies, somebody, and I think it was Hal, remembers seeing his body at the Scientology funeral. So, you know, that whole story is so convoluted, and the likelihood of any of us ever, you know, fully knowing the truth is probably next to zero. But Pat, you know, some of the stuff he revealed, in particular, the papers he handed off to Hal Puthoff in '73, there could be a broader spectrum of culprits than just the CIA. I mean, he potentially exposed some things that other people or maybe not even people would prefer not be known. So, you know, I mean, honestly, like if I could have a wish list after I die of things I'd like to know, that would absolutely be in the top 3.
John Kay said Ed May denies there was a SIO group at SRI, by the way. And maybe that was when, I don't think Ed May he took over after everyone left, I thought, didn't he? So maybe that was the case when he took over.
Yeah, but he
certainly
just
was there early on.
He just ratted himself out on Jeffrey Meeslov. He just admitted he was a Scientologist. Ed
Really?
May.
That's funny.
Go Google
Okay,
Ed May.
well,
Google Ed May.
I haven't watched that interview yet.
It surprised the heck out of me. He admits it straight up right there in a conversation with Meeslov.
Oh, so this is a new one from Jeffrey, is it?
Well, I don't know, maybe 6 months, but it's the latest Ed May interview with Meeslov, and he came out and said that he was also a Scientologist. There's one more hidden that I won't say who it was because they've never come out publicly and said it, and you know, nobody wants to be drug into that controversy against their will. So it was a very active force in the early days.
But did you know that Pat Price was a vampire? And I can prove it because in the book Phenomenon it talks about how he was tasked and he was trying to locate somebody, and it might have been Green or somebody, but they went into a church and knelt down, and Pat was disgusted. He said that place is horrible. It's the most horrible place. And then there was another thing where he was supposed to be viewing a helicopter or something, and then that person was wearing a Christian cross symbol, and he couldn't view it and said it was horrible. So I just wanted to let you know that that's positive proof for me. Pat Price was in fact a vampire, so his death is probably a lot more complicated than it was made out to be in Third Eye Spies.
I think he just had a garlic allergy.
Actually, Grin, I got that story firsthand from Hal Puthoff during our Paul always has a long Skype with him, so we could sit. So this time there's 5 people in the class. We had Hal's attention for about 2 hours. So somebody brought up the question to Hal, and this is something I'm free to share. There's nothing secret about this. So brought up the question, can you be spotted remote viewing? And Hal was like, absolutely yes. It's, he doesn't even think twice. He's dead certain. And he said, as one example, I'll tell you a story. So a CIA agent was testing Pat Price. He went to a Catholic church and asked the priest during the arranged time. So it was one of those outbounder things. And there was supposed to be a particular time that Pat viewed. So he had asked the priest, would you read the your exorcism ritual or litany? I don't know what they call it. And the priest declined, but he gave the little book to the CIA agent. So at the designated time of the remote viewing, and this, like I said, this is straight from Hal, so I'm not making it up. The guy started reading out of the exorcism document, and when it was all over, they went back, and Pat reportedly said, I don't know what was wrong with that place. I could barely get in, and I had a damn headache from it.
But it's also, I think, probably important to point out that Pat Price was just naturally gifted. Like he was a natural. They found him. He was a detective. He worked for the police department, I think, in California. So what he was doing now we don't know 100%. What he was doing could be using him as a totally different modality. He would just he'd just tune into and get information almost like live. So it was not a structured CRV session he was ever doing back then. So could be different modality, therefore different types of restrictions, maybe.
It was a totally different modality. He did full, what we call OBE. It's straight out of the Scientology training. He's a OT5. So he had to do these drills called the Graham Tour. So they would be put through drills like be near the moon, be near Mars, and they were literally taught to be able to instantly come back, do this, over and over and over. Same with Ingo. So Pat was not using any, if you wanted to call it anything, it's ERV, but he wasn't documenting anything. So when you read the quotes, there's not very many quotes available from his original papers, but there is an article that's still out there that has the most amount of quotes from Pat's original papers, and I confirmed that those are accurate with some people involved. And then Skip Atwater gives some quotes in his 2009 Irva talk. So at one point, Pat is describing the detection system at Mount Zeal in Australia, how they detected him. Then he instantly transported himself to Melbourne, had them follow him, and then got them interested in some poor guy there, and then took off and went back to the base. So his modality, the thing is like, well, you've been reading Starfire, right, Daz?
Yep.
So do you remember the parts, or have you gotten to the parts, no spoiler intended, where Ingo had the main character, who strangely happened to be a rock and roll star like Tom DeLonge, right? Where he learned to hover just outside of the body in the laboratory.
Yep.
So, right, okay. So the whole goal of their training was to get stable in and away from body state. So Pat's abilities now, and yeah, he may have been supplemented by being born with natural ability. I'm not saying that, but certainly the level of training and the amount of drills that he and Ingo both had to do clearly facilitated that. Like going, like when Ingo went to the moon, or whatever you want to say it. So yeah, Pat was using full OBE.
It's definitely different. I do know that.
All right, so but that now that
CRV
raises
hadn't even been developed yet.
I'm sorry, but that raises a question. So the objective that one reaches with control remote viewing, Pat Price seemed to do it potentially, at least maybe a part of it was that he was very gifted, but he seemed to have the different methodology, and it's and I wonder if it's superior to the standard CRV methodology. I don't think we'll have the answer, but it just, maybe somebody might.
I haven't really gathered. Yeah, I've not gathered really that what you're talking about in terms of out-of-body experiences versus CRV and things. My approach, my thought process on I guess what it sounds like you're asking, CRV is, even if it's not the best modality to psychic approach to viewing things, it is a testable and scientific approach that you can quantify. And so I think that's the advantage of that. So it's not about it being superior to other modes of psychic viewing, but rather it is something that you can say, these are the numbers, this is what we tested, this is how accurate it was, and this is just, it's just data. So it's not about it being better or worse, it's just quantifiable.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, in the case of Pat Price with Patty Hearst, right? He was able to look at a mugshot, a book with mugshots, and point at the person, describe the car, describe the location, describe so much of that Patty Hearst event. He seemed to take remote viewing and he took it to a whole new level. And I don't know if that was a structure that he learned or whether that's something that was nature or nurtured, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If it was something that was taught to him by the Scientology, which, it just brings back a
I don't know if it was remote viewing.
Sounds basically like extended remote viewing, extended remote viewing to me.
Yes.
Well, in Scientology, it was called remote lookingness. That's the term established in the dictionary long before Ingo ever got at SRI. It is instructions on how to create a remote perception point, which Ingo covers in his autobiography in the chapter called What Am I Using for Eyes When I'm Out of Body? And he talks about setting up this energetic perception position. So, someday maybe
it doesn't require a 40-minute cool down, does it, Russell?
What's
you're
that?
Not doing like a 40-minute. You're not doing like a 30 to 40-minute full body cool down for that.
No,
that's what
they believed and were taught. And I can say I went through some of the training. I was there until '83. It's just done by intention. Just boom. All they say is quit believing that you're in a body. Stop it. It's not true. You're not in a body. Just perceive from where you want to perceive. And that's that. So they had no cool down, no ritual. They had to do the drills over and over and over, especially that Grand Tour drill, which that I think was written in 1954. So this stuff was going on, a couple of decades before. So, without breaking out the old 1950s dictionary and showing you these terms, it just simply is what they were doing. And Pat obviously was one that mastered it. There were other people that had these things. They just didn't end up getting involved, with SRI.
Russell, would you say this out of body thing is that what people would refer to as astral projection in other traditions?
I don't know. I know we're going on long, and I probably should be quiet for a little bit before we end off. So, it literally is that, and there's a chapter in Dr. Mitchell's book related to hers and Ingo's work called Who Said You're in a Body Anyway? The notion that we have so identified with and locked our perception position just in one physical position may be nonsense. So clearly we're associated with a body, but are we in it? And she suggests no. It's definitely the best out-of-body book out there, in my opinion, and I've read a lot of them. It's very small, very short. The Q&A is brilliant. She talks about training Ingo and Ingo's struggle with learning to perceive colors out of body.
What's the book called, sorry?
Here, let me go. My pile is so collapsed right now. I don't know if I can find it. Let me Google it. So I'll shut off my mic, carry on, and then I'll.
I got to be honest, Daz, the book that you wrote, I'm not trying to get off topic, but Surfing the Psychic Internet, the experiences that it kind of sounded similar to extended remote viewing to me. Just had to say that.
Did you do Gateway, Daz?
No.
Institute?
No. What I did I think it was about 15 years was as part of what we call a psychic development group, and we did these. How can I describe it? Yeah, just trying to travel out of the body type experiences, but using classical psychic techniques rather than any kind of remote viewing. And it was lots of conversations with shadow beings and discarnate entities and all kinds of weird life forms, giving hints on how you should develop yourself psychically, all this kind of stuff. So it's stuff that I couldn't validate in any way, and it was all very classical esoteric stuff. Yeah. But yeah, it's a bit like the ERV stuff, because you would meditate yourself to you're in such a relaxed state, and then you would set yourself an objective to go somewhere and speak to someone and do a certain thing. So it's a similar kind of concept. But the thing is, and the thing I had problems. Yeah, and I had problems then in doing all that kind of stuff. Because I was out of the zone so much that I had to wait until I'd come back from all of that after an hour, and then had to quickly scribble it all down and try and remember what had happened. Which is
It's why I use ERV very sparingly, and it's typically when I'm looking for a very specific. I want this experience. It's like the written data I'm not interested in. I want, okay, what's the experience of it? And so, because you're right, it's because it's almost like you only have so much RAM to fill up when you're in an ERV session. And it's like, if you keep getting more data, it's like, I'm going to forget if I don't hurry up and get back to the pen and paper and write it down, where you don't have that issue at all in a written session. So I do actually quite a bit of ERV. And so, I mean, I went through Morehouse's work. I also went through the Moreau Institute's version of it. They're very similar. Obviously, one's based off the other. And then made slight adjustments of my own over time that just felt natural. And so it certainly works. It's very, here's an experience and then get out, or else it's like a dream almost, because I mean, you're in an altered state of consciousness. Your body is like it should be, if you're doing it right, and with that method at least, should be fairly almost asleep or like close to it. And so there's only I can only fill up so much RAM before I'm going to start forgetting details. Whereas written sessions, I mean, you can just keep tasking me blind for 20 days and I'll just keep getting more data on it. So it's like a lot more useful project wise, I find.
I agree. I think it's very experiential as compared to informational in that sense.
Which can be useful. We can definitely.
The majority of my RV stuff has actually been ERV. And as technology has progressed, what I have found was very useful is the use of voice activating recorders. So whilst I'm lying, I'm basically having a monitor to a certain extent, where I've been trying to keep myself in a state of mind where I'm calling out the perception that I'm receiving. And so instead of listening to
I thought about that.
Say 40 minutes, an hour and a half worth of oh, I'm a little bit sleepy. Just the core points are when I'm actually calling out the perceptions, which I'm finding very, very strong. And it suddenly comes down to about maybe 2, 3, maybe 5 minutes maximum across an hour, where these bits come out and the voice activated recording comes up. And I can then go back to the images that I've visually perceived. And fortunately, I'm like you, Daz, I'm sort of quite artistic and able to relay stuff and to pop it down. That I found invaluable. It's been very, very helpful.
What do you use? What do you use for the audio recording? Because I actually had that idea. I just didn't figure out, like my phone wasn't, I tried it with my cell phone and it was just, my whispers were way too quiet to pick it up. And so I was like, how am I going to record this?
I'm completely drunk and I've got a mouthful of plums. I think, what the hell was that? I cannot figure out what the hell I was saying. And I just scratch it off. But it was, I used a series of little devices, and then now phones obviously have apps that you can download, and the last time I did it with a phone app, it worked pretty bloody well, to be fair.
Really?
It was quite clear, and it just a couple of keywords that I blurted out, blah, 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 cricket pitch, whatever it may have been, and I'd suddenly be back and I go, oh yeah, I remember this, and I could then draw the images and lay it down, and that worked really, really, really very well.
Cool. No,
Excellent,
that's good.
guys.
Yeah, it's cool that you did that.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up soon because it's been 3 hours and it's going to be a big video for me to render.
Yeah, we're going to have to get breakfast soon, Daz. It's
yeah. It's a late night tonight.
Thank you for doing this, Daz. This has definitely been a fun way of spending the night.
Yeah, no problem. Well,
Thanks, Daz.
We'll carry on as long as the lockdown continues, and yeah. And if anyone wants to talk about anything in particular or present anything or anything, just say and we can work it in.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Daz. Have a good night, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
Good night, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye. Keep safe.
Take care, guys.
Nice to see you.
Bye for now.
Bye. Ching, ching, ching.